Chapter 173. Do we need to worry about the anger? The difference in strength is too great, so we don't need to worry about it, unless heaven and earth change greatly. What is considered a heaven and earth change greatly? The spiritual sources in Chaotian are all gone, and the Yuan-Shi is scattered everywhere. Is it possible? Maybe one day, but not now. What about now? The real threat to the human race is the Snowy Kingdom. Jing Jiao said, so the only thing we need to worry about is the Snowy Kingdom invading the South. Back when the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom invaded the South, the cultivation practitioners who didn't choose to flee were all killed or wounded. The cultivation sects in the North, regardless of whether they were orthodox or deviant, were almost wiped out, and the human world was in disorder. The populace lost their homes and became bandits. Some of them obtained the wealth and the spiritual treasures of the cultivation sects, so they ran amok, killing and looting everywhere, committing all kinds of crimes. Hence, the 3 months of flames of war, said Zhao Liu. That's right, said Jing Jiao. Zhao Liu suddenly thought of someone. Without the Broadsword King, many mortals would have died. He was also a cultivation practitioner. Do the mortals have no gratitude other than resentment and anger? Chao Yuan is not a regular cultivation practitioner, but a Buddha. Few cultivation practitioners can become Buddhas. Zhao Liu continued. But in order to resist the Snowy Kingdom and suppress the underworld, many cultivation practitioners have died. Don't they deserve the gratitude of the mortals? Jing Jiao asked while staring in her eyes. Do they fight for the mortals or for their own sex? I don't think there's a difference, said Zhao Liu. Of course there's a difference. It's because there's an order of priority when facing life and death. Jing Jiao continued. As long as they can protect their sex, do they really care about the mortals' lives? Zhao Liu thought of her colleagues on Liangwang Peak, like Guinan Shan and Gu Han, but she couldn't give an answer. Jing Jiao continued. Even if every cultivation practitioner behaved like Chao Yuan, the resentment and anger of the mortals wouldn't disappear. Why? Zhao Liu was baffled. Jing Jiao said, because of jealousy. Zhao Liu imagined that if she couldn't cultivate, she would be a common noble lady in Zhaoga City. The scenery above the clouds, the indescribable feelings in the world, the untouchable experiences, and the peaceful and uncontrolled cultivation life. Yes, how could he not be jealous? If it were the lower-class citizens who were struggling to survive, they would have millions of reasons to do so. Jing Jiao stood up and walked to the front of the corridor, looking at a cluster of green bamboos. The most inexplicable question is, why can you live for hundreds of years, thousands of years, or even longer, while we can only live for a few decades? Yes, this was a truly unsolvable problem. The corridor was silent, just like everyone would be jealous of true longevity. Zhao Liu looked at his back and said, that's why something happened to Marshal Granduncle Jingyang, right? Jing Jiao did not turn around and did not answer her question. It was as if he did not hear her. His eyes were closed, and his eyelashes were very long. The sunlight shone on his face after passing through the bamboo branches in front of the corridor, leaving mottled shadows of the bamboo leaves. Zhao Liu walked to his side and said after a moment of silence, you don't look like someone who is willing to think about these things. I come from the human world, so I will think about the human world. Jing Jiao opened his eyes and said, but it's enough to think about it. Looking at his face, Zhao Liu asked, why is it enough to think about it? Jing Jiao said, because it's easy to know that nobody can come up with a solution. Zhao Liu asked with raised eyebrows, that's it? What else can I do? Jing Jiao said, let's go back to the mountain first. Cultivation is more important. You can come back to the human world when you don't think about these things anymore. Looking at his profile, Zhao Liu asked seriously, have you found the person you were looking for? Jing Jiao shook his head and said, but I can feel that he has appeared and seen me in a certain way. Zhao Liu said after some thought, well, be careful in the cultivation tournament. Jing Jiao was surprised, asking, why should I participate in the cultivation tournament? Zhao Liu was even more surprised, asking, why? Jing Jiao said, as I told you, It's too dangerous to seek plum blossoms by stepping on blood, and I seldom do such risky things. Zhao Lei opened her eyes wide and stared into his, asking, why? Jing Jiu said, because I'm afraid of death. On their way to Zhaoga City, the fake manor cave of the immortal Jingyang was opened, and Jing Jiu observed it in the dark. As a result, he was discovered by the master of Shilai Peak, Fong Jingtian, who even had the intention to kill him. Jing Jiu sensed a great danger at that moment. It was the first time he had such a feeling after many years. Fong Jingtian didn't wield his sword that night, but Tian Jingren did later in the old plum garden. Then Jing Jiu realized that it was not the same as before. Back then, Jing Jiu was used to nobody being able to kill him, so he could walk around and do whatever he wanted. But it was different now. Many people could try to kill him. That day when he heard that Zhao Lei had been assassinated, Jing Jiu felt some emotion in his heart, even though he looked normal. It had something to do with this. Jing Jiu didn't like this kind of emotion, so he decided to act more cautiously in the future. He shouldn't always think about walking around in the world to lure those people to show up, and it would be safer for him to return to Aoyama. Zhao Lei didn't expect Jing Jiu to give such an answer, asking, "You always want him to come to you. Why don't you go to him?" Looking at the sky above the eaves, Jing Jiu said, "I feel that he wants me to participate in the cultivation tournament and see something there." Zhao Lei said seriously while looking at Jing Jiu, "If you believe that you are right, why not go and have a look?" After some thought, Jing Jiu reached out his hand and rubbed her head, saying, "It makes sense." The final verdict of Shi Fengqian's case was suicide, but many people still cast doubtful gazes at the Aoyama sect. Some forces intended to stir up some trouble, but Zhaoga City was still as peaceful as before. It seemed that there was a secret force in the imperial court that suppressed everything. This made many people feel even more awe. This was Zhaoga City, not the south. Who would have thought that the Aoyama sect had such a powerful influence here, which was not inferior to the Zhongzhou school? The more awe the royal concubine who felt, the more difficult her life would be, because almost everybody thought that she was the mastermind behind the assassination of Zhao Lei. As far as royal concubine who was concerned, it was an exciting period of time. She had just been allowed to have a child by the emperor and was favored by the emperor, but she ended up in such a predicament. Am I so stupid or so stubborn? I'm not Lien Sanyue's disciple. How could I act recklessly at such a time? Royal concubine who didn't wear any makeup on her face, looking a bit haggard. "That Shi Fengqian has done me in," she said angrily. The old servant said with a bitter expression, "You shouldn't have sent him that sum of money. Wouldn't that give others an excuse? That's one thing. Shi Fengqian helped me with something. He's dead now, so I have to do something for him." Royal concubine who said seriously, "To repay the favor and in the cause and effect is what Zen master taught me back then." The old servant thought that the cause and effect were not so simple, so she asked worriedly, "What should we do now?" Royal concubine who was worried as well. The emperor hadn't come to see her for a few days. On the surface, her life hadn't changed, but the air around her seemed to have become thicker and thicker, making it difficult for her to breathe. She suddenly asked, "Does Zen master still refuse to see me?" "Yes, I even think," the old servant glanced at her and said gingerly, "Maybe the Duke of he didn't send the message to the Net Perception Temple." Royal concubine who said with furrowed brows, "I'd like to see Zhao Lei in person. Is it possible?" The old servant said, "She has been severely injured and is recuperating now, so she won't see anyone. And I heard that she is preparing to go back to Aoyama to recuperate." After a moment of silence, royal concubine who asked, "What about Jing Jiu?" The expression on the old servant's face changed slightly as she said, "He of course went to participate in the cultivation tournament." Chapter 174. The Net Perception Temple received a letter. It wasn't a letter from the Duke of he requesting an audience with Zen Master on behalf of royal concubine who, because he didn't dare. The emperor hadn't seen the royal concubine recently, and he had pondered what it meant for a long time. This letter had a much more significant background, so nobody dared delay it, and it was delivered to the hands of the principal justice. The principal justice walked through the peach forest in a hurry and came to the deep end of the temple. A young monk sat on his knees on a low couch in front of the window, staring at a pile of thin wooden sticks in front of him with a very focused expression. The principal justice knew that this was the favorite game of Zen master, the wooden stick-picking game, and the whole of the Guocheng temple was used to it. He knew that Zen master didn't like to be disturbed at this time, but he still walked in after coughing twice. Zen master sighed helplessly, asking, "What's the matter?" The principal justice handed over the letter in his hand. Zen master raised his eyebrows slightly and took out the letter, reading its contents quickly. This letter was written by the broadsword king himself. The principal justice asked worriedly, "What did Big Brother Chow write the letter for?" "He asked about someone," Zen master replied. "Who?" asked the principal justice. Zen master said with a smile. He asked if Jingjiu was the disciple of experiencing the mortal world in the temple. Hearing this question, the principal justice felt a bit relieved. The status of the broadsword king shouldn't be interested in these rumors, but considering his former status, it was easy to understand why he would write a letter to ask about Jingjiu. In fact, the principal justice was very interested in this matter as well. A few years ago, he attended the inherited sword competition of the Aoyama sect on behalf of the Guocheng temple, but he didn't understand why Zen master attached so much importance to the initiation ceremony of this regular disciple. Later, there were many discussions about the origin of Jingjiu, and he couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with this. The identity of the disciple of experiencing the mortal world in the Guocheng temple had always been kept a secret. Besides the chief monk and Zen master, nobody knew about it, so he could only guess. I'll reply. Is there anything else? Zen master still didn't give a clear answer. The principal of justice took a look at the thin letter in his hand and said, "The law competition will be held in the Snow Mountain in the north of the Ink Sea. It is very far away from the Northern Battlefront Army and Brother Chow. If anything happens, we may not be able to save them in time. Even though the purpose of the competition is to test their potential in a life-and-death situation, but should we take care of them secretly?" His words had no specific target, but it was obvious that he was referring to someone mentioned in the letter. Zen master thought for a moment and said, "That old friend of mine has been cautious all his life. Jingjiu inherited his legacy, so he should be fine." The cultivation tournament was held in the far north, and the participating sects of the plum meeting were still in Jiaoga City. The Nishiyama house was still full of people, even livelier than before, because many cultivators did not stay in their courtyards to meditate and cultivate as usual, but came to the cliff plateau outside. The cultivators didn't come out to take a walk or socialize because they were bored. They came out to look at the paintings. The Nishiyama house was protected by the formation, so it wouldn't rain heavily. But there was a long roof corridor in the courtyard. The side of the corridor near the mountain was smoothed out, and dozens of paintings were painted on it. Those paintings extended from a roof of the corridor to the ground, about 10 feet high and 2 feet wide. A few birds were painted on the paintings with golden powder, and the plum branches were winding among the paintings, and the red plum flowers were blooming. Most of the cultivators fixed their gazes on the painting in the middle. The plum flowers in the painting were in full bloom, and a dozen flowers had already bloomed. The flowers were very big and colorful, looking like the color of blood, showing a stunning beauty. No matter how they looked at it, the painting should be more than half completed. The plum branches extended downward, and the ink became darker, turning into words, which turned out to be the names. Lo Huainan is really too powerful. Someone said sentimentally, though Tong Yin is behind closed doors, he alone is enough to make the Zhongzhou school look down on its peers. There were 5 names under the painting. The name Lo Huainan was among them. Each name had a cold branch with plum blossoms on its tip. The 5 cold branches intertwined and overlapped each other, looking like the plum blossoms were in full bloom, but it was hard to tell which branch the plum blossoms originated from. If one looked closely, they would find that most of the plum blossoms originated from Lo Huainan's branch. The rest of the people only had 1 or 2 plum blossoms on their branches. There were many other paintings under the roof corridor. The contents of the paintings were basically the same, but the number and size of the plum blossoms were different. This was the list of the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting. It was the rumored seeking plum blossoms by treading on blood. The young cultivation practitioners participating in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting were divided into groups by drawing lots according to their fighting styles and their best cultivation methods. Each group had 5 participants. Every time a monster of the Snowy Kingdom was killed, a bloody plum blossom would be added to the painting, and the plum blossoms would be divided into 3 different sizes according to the difference in strength between the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. The group that finished its painting first would be the winner, and it had nothing to do with the competition between the sections. The reason the previous cultivation practitioners made this arrangement was that they didn't want the sects to act on their own and have conflicts in the cultivation tournament. So they didn't want to unite the orthodox cultivation practitioners to fight against the external enemies. However, the sects were there, so who wouldn't care about their own achievements? Some busybodies would calculate the achievements according to the sections. In this cultivation tournament, Lo Huainan's performance was as impressive as usual, and the other disciples of Zhongzhou school like Xiang Wanshu also performed well. Their current achievements were much better than those of other sections. Tong Lu of the Western Sea Sword School was indeed the participant ranked second by the curtain rollers. There were many plum blossoms on his branch, and the number was not less than that of Lo Huainan. However, those plum blossoms were of different sizes, which was a bit awkward to look at. The disciples of Yamatai, Kunlun, and the Baotong Zen Temple also performed as well as in the previous years. The Aoyama sect performed surprisingly well. Zhuyu of Ozawa walked under the corridor, showing a worried expression, thinking that the Aoyama sect would be in trouble this time. The plum meeting was divided into 5 categories: zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Except for Nan Wang and Jingju this year, the disciples of Aoyama seldom participated in the first 4 categories. However, in the last category, the cultivation tournament, the Aoyama sect had always performed the best. In the last few plum meetings, Lo Huainan had won first place in the cultivation tournament, and the disciples of Aoyama had also won many good rankings. Especially when the rankings were calculated according to the sects, the disciples of Aoyama had never let the first place go to someone else. Compared to the previous years, the Aoyama sect's performance this year was too average, and it could even be said to be terrible. The reason for this was that the disciples of Liangwang Peak had been the main force of the Aoyama sect in the cultivation tournament in the past years. But this year, the disciples of Liangwang Peak had seldom come because of various reasons. In particular, the top 3 swordsmen of Liangwang Peak like Guanan Shan, Jian Ruyun, and Guhan didn't come. According to the current situation, the disciples of Yamatai, Western Sea Sword School, and even Kunlun might leave the Aoyama sect far behind, let alone the Zhongzhou school. This was a disgrace. Many cultivation practitioners were discussing this matter. What about that Jingjiu? Isn't he rumored to be very powerful? I heard that Guanan Shan and the other gods of killing of Liangwang Peak didn't come because of him. It's just a boast. How can he be more powerful than the principal disciple of Aoyama, based on his cultivation time and cultivation state? Even if he has some hidden reasons, his performance is still too poor. The cultivation tournament had been going on for more than 10 days. After the initial nervousness and discomfort, the talented young disciples of various sects started to show their talents. The bloody plum blossoms on the paintings grew in number. Even the worst paintings had 2 or 3 small plum blossoms, though they looked a bit shabby. Chapter 175. In the distant north, on the other side of the Ink Sea, there was a cluster of mountains rising abruptly from the snowland, devoid of human habitation and extremely desolate. The so-called mountains were actually very far from each other, looking like the beetles crawling out of the flower. The snowland was white, but the mountains were black. The colors were very monotonous, and the eyes would feel uncomfortable if one looked at them for a long time. It was said that this place used to be the ancestral hall of the Wansong sect, but it was destroyed by the largest monster invasion, leaving no traces behind. This place was close to the edge of the snowy kingdom. It was extremely cold, even though it was the early summer. The chaotic wind above the clouds in the high sky was as cold as a knife. It was hard to fly for a long time, regardless of whether one was riding a sword or riding a magic treasure. The flying sedan, which could insulate itself from the cold, was too slow and dangerous. Only the precious magic treasures of the major cultivation sects could travel freely here. If a cultivation practitioner flew in the high sky or landed on the highest peak in the northwest and looked northward, he would see the energy of heaven and earth fluctuating on the snowland within a radius of 1,000 square miles. Especially in the surroundings of those black mountains, every once in a while, one could see the strong wind tearing the low-hanging clouds apart. The sword light and the treasure light intertwined and reflected each other, stirring up a tornado-like snowstorm on the surface of the snowfield, mixed with ear-piercing screams and muffled roars, looking like countless fireworks. Those were the young cultivation practitioners participating in the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting, hunting and killing the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. It was very quiet around an isolated mountain, and it was deathly quiet inside the mountain. Sitting in a spot on the cliff, Jingjiu looked at the snowland in the distance, remaining reticent. There was still some winter snow on the peak top, and his eyelashes were covered with frost. Yet, it was dusk rather than early morning. There was a cave a few thousand feet away, in which a bonfire was lit. For young cultivation practitioners sat around the bonfire. It was evident that the bonfire had just been lit, and the fire wasn't fully lit yet. The dim light shone on their young faces, making their anxious emotions more apparent. A gloomy young man in a white Taoist robe stood up and walked to the outside of the cave, shooting a glance at Jingjiu. A moment later, he came back, shaking his head. This person was a disciple of the Black Heaven sect, Lu Jin. He specialized in fire elemental techniques and was most suitable for fighting in cold environments. The square-faced young man sitting next to him frowned slightly and sighed in disappointment. His name was Wu Mingzhong, a young disciple of the No Mercy sect. What he practiced was the rarely seen sword and shield, which could provide an excellent shield. He was quite dissatisfied with the current situation of his group, but he couldn't say anything because of the relationship between the No Mercy sect and the Aoyama sect. In the end, someone couldn't hold it in any longer. That young cultivator was called Dai Ying, a young disciple that the Kunlun sect had focused on training. He was dressed in black and had a green ribbon tied around his waist. It was a magic weapon of the Kunlun sect, the green rope. It was said that it was refined from the long bones of the green flood dragon and was extremely powerful. Dai Ying's eyebrows were very straight, just like his words. If he still refuses to leave tomorrow morning, then we'll leave him behind. Lu Jin and Wu Mingzhong didn't respond. The remaining young woman said hesitantly, "Should we wait a little longer? He is a senior cultivator after all, and he might have a more thorough consideration than we do. Besides, he won first place in the chess tournament, so his cultivation state must be quite high. I heard that he even defeated Big Brother Guhan in the sword trial of Aoyama. I'd like to know what a senior cultivator of the Aoyama sect is thinking by hiding here every day and refusing to go out." Dai Ying said to her with a sneer, "I don't know what his cultivation state is, but if we stay here with him, what about the cultivation tournament?" The name of the young woman was Yin Xingma, a disciple of the star-picking tower. She used the star pot as her magic weapon. Like the disciples of the Platonist sect, she played an indispensable role in every cultivation tournament team. Hearing Dai Ying's straightforward words, the other three, including her, all fell silent. The question was who was going to talk to that person. The light of the bonfire shone on their faces, changing constantly. "Since it is my suggestion, let me do it," Dai Ying said while gritting his teeth. Jingjiu glanced at this young disciple of Kunlun. They had traveled together for more than 10 days, and he remembered that his name was Dai Ying. "I don't feel right. Let's stay a few more days," Jingjiu added after some thought. "I have a suggestion. What if we don't want to accept your suggestion?" Dai Ying asked while staring into Jingjiu's eyes, looking a bit nervous. Jingjiu's status was much higher than theirs, and he was a famous person, though his reputation wasn't that good. The cultivation practitioners who participated in the plum meeting all knew what had happened in Jiaoga City, and they all guessed that the official of the Pure Heaven Bureau had been killed by Jingjiu. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "Let's leave tomorrow then." Back in the cliff cave, Dying kicked away the bonfire angrily. His companions were surprised, asking him what had happened. Did Jingjiu insist that they stay in the mountain? Nothing, Dying said while breathing heavily. He was in a bad mood indeed. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have had to endure it for so many days. How could he do well in the cultivation tournament after so many days of delay? The twilight soon disappeared and the night arrived. The snowy clouds dispersed and the starlight shone on the cliffs, making it even colder. Jingjiu looked at the snowland in silence, not feeling anything. This place had been the last line of defense for the humans for many years, but it was his first time to come here. The main reason he participated in the cultivation tournament was to try to find that person, as Zhao Liu said, even though there was no hot pot here. The assassination attempt in the Mingtsue Valley, the shadow of Bulo Lin and the underworld, and the hidden meaning behind all these events made him feel uneasy. It was understandable that that person wanted to kill Zhao Liu, just like what he had done many years ago. He wanted to prove to Jingjiu that his path was the correct one. Meanwhile, he wanted to take this opportunity to let Jingjiu see this cold and cruel snowland with his own eyes. What was the meaning of all this? In the early morning, a group of people left the lone mountain and stepped on the snowland. The other teams participating in the cultivation tournament had already walked far into the depths of the snowland, leaving them far behind. Normally, the snowland that had been cleared by the participants should be safe, but they were still very careful. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or not, but none of the 5 people, including Jingjiu, had participated in the cultivation tournament before. Suddenly, a scream broke out. The girl named Yin Xingma jumped 100 feet to avoid something, and she was so panicked that she forgot to call out the star pot to defend herself. Dying looked at the place where she had been standing and said with furrowed eyebrows, "The eggs of the snowworms are not dangerous, and they are not counted as achievements. It is useless to kill more of them." Having said that, he took the lead and walked forward, looking very confident. It was late spring when they left Jiaoga City, and now it was summer. The temperature was relatively high even in the north of the Ink Sea, and most of the monsters in the snowland would be asleep at this time. Jingjiu walked over there and waved his sleeve to brush off the ice and snow. He took a look at the egg, which was about the size of a fist and covered with a layer of translucent white film, with 3 vertical and horizontal cracks on it. The edges of the cracks were covered with a sticky liquid, and some green hairs could be vaguely seen, which looked quite disgusting. He reached out his hand to pick it up. When his fingers touched the egg, he felt a slight suction. He thought it was quite interesting, so he took a closer look at it. Chapter 176. I was also troubled when I read The Path Toward Heaven. It's not bad, but why are there so few updates and the author writes so slowly? It's hard to solve. It has nothing to do with any objective situation. It's just that I'm getting lazier and lazier as I get older. Of course, it's not right, but I have to find a way to change it. As for the party composition, I did want to follow the game, but that was just my personal curiosity. It had nothing to do with the game's adaptation. To be honest, who would change their own thinking and story just for the sake of the game's adaptation? The reason I'm curious is that the butterfly has been playing Honor of Kings, the leader has been playing On My OG, and Haidang has been playing Kensan. They're all addicted to it. I want to figure out the fun of it and understand it through learning. But when I was making the detailed outline, I found that I couldn't design a nanny no matter how they taught me. Sigh. Finally, the Butterfly number 20 is going to release a new book of Honor of Kings. I don't play games, but I think it's awesome. The suction from the egg of the snowworm was so weak that not even a hair could be moved. If Jingjiu's senses were not so sharp, he might not have found it. He looked at the egg in front of him and squeezed it with his fingers. The egg squeaked like a leather bag filled with wine, but there was no response. With his sword awareness, Jingjiu was sure that the life in the egg had woken up. When his fingers fell on the egg, the life showed greed and the desire to devour. But then it sensed the horror of Jingjiu's consciousness and began to play dead out of fear. It was a newborn demon beast of the snow kingdom of the lowest level, but it had such a strong awareness of life and death before it had seen the real world. It was really interesting. Jingjiu put it away. At the foot of a black rock peak hundreds of miles away, several young practitioners were discussing something. They were also participants of the cultivation tournament. Their clothes were ragged, and they must have experienced many battles. But they were very excited, and their eyes were full of confidence. They were summing up yesterday's battle, hoping to cooperate with each other more tacitly, so that close combat, defense, and long-range attacks could be combined more effectively. With a soft beep, a young cultivator took out a magical item and carefully looked at the summary of yesterday's list, saying, "Lo Huainan," and the others are still in front. That referred to their positions on the law tournament ranking, which also referred to their positions in the snowland. Lo Huainan's group had already gone deep into the snowfield and encountered many powerful monsters from the snow country. That was why the plum blossom in the painting was so big. They subconsciously looked at the young man in front of them, revealing expressions of admiration. If it weren't for this person in their group, they wouldn't even have the extravagant hope of being able to follow behind Lo Huainan. They would have long been left in the dust and lost the possibility of getting first place in the cultivation tournament. The young man stood tall and straight in the wind and snow, like a real sword. He was the genius disciple of the Western Sea Sword School, Tong Lu. According to the preliminary evaluation of the curtain rollers, Tong Lu was ranked second in the law tournament, even surpassing by Zhao and Tong Yin, and was only second to Lo Huainan. In fact, among the dozens of paintings of winter plum blossoms hanging in the roof corridor of the Nishiyama house, only his group could barely keep up with Lo Huainan's group. In terms of the number of plum blossoms, Tong Lu's group was no less than Lo Huainan's. It was only because they didn't go deep into the snowfield that they didn't encounter too many monsters of the snow country in the middle state. The four young cultivators understood that they were the ones who slowed Tong Lu down. They felt apologetic, but they behaved very bravely in battle. What's going on with Senior Jingjiu? Why hasn't he made any achievements after so many days? I'm not sure. There's a Kunlun disciple in my big brother's group. According to him, Jingjiu hasn't made any moves these days, and he hasn't even left that mountain. The first mountain after entering the snowfield. That's right. Is he scared? But if he doesn't even dare enter the snowfield, why would he participate in the cultivation tournament? The cold wind was as sharp as knives, rolling up the snowflakes and landing on Tong Lu's ordinary face. He listened to the discussions of his companions, expressionless and unmoved. If it were before the chess tournament of the plum meeting, he might have thought that Jingjiu was a cowardly and incompetent person. But he didn't think so after that chess game. A person who could withstand Tong Yan's lethal attack on the chessboard and counterattack successfully must have a very powerful Dao heart and willpower. Yet, he couldn't figure out what Jingjiu was thinking. Suddenly, a surprise cry broke out. Tong Lu walked back to his companion's side. Seeing the latest news from the magic treasure, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. Jingjiu and his group walked on the snowfield, keeping a distance of a few dozen feet to 1,000 feet between each other, so that they could use their best cultivation methods to rescue their companions who were closest to them. The ground in the snowfield suddenly trembled once, and then returned to quietness. The five of them halted their steps. Lu Jin took out his magic treasure and pointed it at the snowfield, his face growing gloomier. He turned his head and said to his companions soundlessly, "Something is here." It was deathly quiet in the snowfield, except for the whistling sound of the cold wind. These young cultivation practitioners were inexperienced, and all they knew was to hold back their energy and stay silent. They didn't expect the sudden disappearance of the footsteps and the quietness to be a clear warning to the creature under the snowfield. The snowfield in the distance suddenly bulged up and then turned into a snowy line, moving toward the distance. This was the first fight after participating in the cultivation tournament, so they were a bit excited, but more nervous so they didn't react immediately. In order to escape faster, the creature crawled out of the snowfield at a faster speed. From a distance of more than 6,000 feet, they could vaguely see that it was a spider-like creature, about the size of a regular round table. Its back is smooth as a mirror, and its legs moving as fast as lightning, but they couldn't see them clearly. The snow-foot monster, Dai Ying yelled. Who can tell how many legs it has? 6, replied Jingjiao. Hearing this answer, Yin Xingma and the other two relaxed a bit, and Dai Ying even smiled. The fewer legs a snow-foot monster had, the higher its level was, and the more powerful it was. The 6-legged snow-foot monster was the weakest, and it hadn't even leveled up once. Even the most common cultivation practitioner could deal with it easily. Jingjiao untied the iron sword on his back. Dai Ying reached out to stop him. Let me. Before his voice died away, he had already dashed away. The other 3 followed him. In a few breaths, Dai Ying had reached the back of the snow-foot monster and whipped it hard with the green rope in his hand. The green rope was a magic treasure of the Kunlun sect, containing the power of the flood dragon bone. The heavy blow was more than 1,000 pounds, and even a stone would be shattered. Even though the shell of the snow-foot monster was hard, this one was only in the 6-legged realm, so it couldn't bear such a great force. With a muffled sound, the shell of the snow-foot beast cracked open. Countless amounts of green fluid sprayed out in all directions like sharp arrows. Dai Ying stepped back in the air and landed on the ground. Wu Mingzhong dashed forward and summoned his sword and shield, protecting Dai Ying behind it. Yin Xingma was a little slower. She raised the star pot and recited a spell silently. A stream of clear light shot out from the star pot and poured down like a waterfall, covering her and Lu Jin. Only a series of crackling sounds could be heard, like a torrential downpour, mixed with the sizzling sound of burning. Wu Mingzhong and Yin Xingma put away their magic treasures after all the green fluids had fallen. The surface of the thick and solid sword and shield was full of densely packed pits, which are the traces of corrosion caused by the venom. Before participating in the cultivation tournament, they had learned relevant knowledge and knew that the green blood of the snow-foot monster was highly poisonous and highly corrosive. But only after seeing the real scene did they realize that even the snow-foot monster of the lowest level could be so dangerous. Even if it could be killed easily, it could still pose a threat to them. Looking at the dead snow-foot monster in front of them, Yin Xingma couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. She suddenly thought of Jingjiao and looked over worriedly, only to find that Jingjiao was standing not far away, his white robe fluttering in the wind, without a single drop of venom on him. At this moment, something strange happened again. From the cracked shell of the snow-foot monster, a small black shadow suddenly leaped out. It squeaked strangely and ran away at extremely fast speed. Ting air! It's a ting air! Dai Ying looked at that thing. Instead of being shocked, he became even more excited. The ting air was a rare intelligent being among the middle-level monsters of the Snow Kingdom. It lived in the shell of the snow-foot monster and could control hundreds of snow-foot monsters at the same time with its voice. On the battlefield, the most important mission of the ting air was to drive the tide-like snow-foot monsters to attack the human army. The speed of the ting air was amazing, but it was not dangerous. Who would have thought that in a place far away from the core of the Snow Kingdom, there would be a ting air living in the body of the 6-legged snow beast of the lowest level? To them, this was an extremely lucky thing. Without hesitation, Dai Ying was ready to chase after the ting air. Jingjiao felt something was out of place, so he reached out his hand in an attempt to stop him. Dai Ying misunderstood that Jingjiao wanted to take the credit, so he pushed Jingjiao's hand away with a sneer and leaped forward. The Kunlun sect was located in the Cold Mountain, and they were good at the movement of wind and snow. Dai Ying didn't need to ride the sword, so he leaped into the air. In a few seconds, he had become a dark speck in the distance and caught up with the ting air. The green light illuminated the snowland. Jingjiao whipped the green rope toward the ground. Chapter 177. Xingma and the other two were so shocked that they rode their magic treasures to rush over. They arrived there as quickly as they could, and Jingjiu was already there. Dai-in was lying on the snowy ground, devoid of vitality. His face had been cut by a sharp object, and his flesh was badly mutilated. He looked extremely miserable. The green rope had been broken into dozens of pieces scattered around his body. There was a tiny black hole in the middle of the rope, its depth unknown. The small black shadow must have escaped into the underground through the black hole. It was so fast that even Jing Jiu's piercing discernment couldn't catch up with it. The cold wind was whistling, hitting people's faces with the snowflakes. It was extremely cold. It was deathly quiet in the field. Before participating in the cultivation tournament, they had learned the relevant knowledge and were sure that they wouldn't encounter a monster that was too powerful as long as they didn't enter the center of the snowland. The small thing that flew out from the shell of the snow-foot monster looked like a listening ear, but why was it so terrifying? Even a magic treasure of the Kunlun sect couldn't hurt it, but it was broken into dozens of pieces. Xingma and the other two felt uneasy and fearful, and they looked at Jing Jiu reflexively. Jing Jiu looked at the corpse on the snowy ground in silence, once again confirming why that person asked him to come to the snowland to participate in the cultivation tournament. As Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu had said, the number of deaths was the highest here. This was at least one of the reasons. Zhao City had gradually become stuffy in summer, but the cultivation practitioners in the Nishiyama house didn't have to worry about this problem. How could they feel hot while enjoying the plum blossoms in the paintings in the corridor in the gentle breeze summoned by the formation? As time went by, more and more plum blossoms appeared in the paintings, attracting many praises. Each painting represented several cultivation practitioners participating in the cultivation tournament. Because of their different styles, the paintings presented were naturally different. The painting in which Lo Huainan was and had the most plum blossoms, and the painting in which Tong Lu was and had the most plum blossoms. Even those shabby paintings with only 2 or 3 plum blossoms had a sense of stubbornness. Only that painting was still blank. The bell rang. The cultivation practitioners were startled, but they soon understood what it meant. They walked out of the corridor and retreated to the pavilions in the mountains. Some important figures had come to admire the paintings, and they needed to leave. Standing in the forest and looking at the indistinct figures in the distant corridors, the cultivation practitioners discussed among themselves, wondering what those important figures would say. Soon, the comments of those important figures on the plum paintings were spread to this place. Naturally, Zen Master's comments were the most valued. The young Zen Master had the highest opinion of Baizeo's painting, praising, "This painting is well-proportioned and full of character, the most beautiful." The cultivation practitioners were startled, wondering why the young Zen Master thought Luo Huainan was inferior to his young sister, even though he had performed the best. After Zen Master of Een of Master's words, the Zen had said he would not. They understood. They could he as possible. Lo Huainan was indeed very powerful. She had a dozen plum blossoms on a cold branch, but her companions did not have many. The entire painting looked uneven. On the other hand, the plum blossoms in Baizeo's painting were very evenly distributed. This meant that she had a clear understanding of her companions' abilities and was able to use them to their fullest potential. In terms of future leaders of the righteous path, she was indeed superior to Lo Huainan. What is Zen Master's opinion of Jingjiu? A cultivation practitioner asked the question that everyone was most curious about. The young monk walked along the corridor with his hands behind his back. His bare feet made a popping sound as they touched the ground. He was like a naughty child who had come for a walk. But the important figures of the cultivation world, including the sect master of the Kunlun sect and the Duke of He, all obediently followed behind him, not daring to make sound. The young monk stopped in front of a painting. Looking at the few branches and a large expanse of blank space in the painting, a faint smile showing on his face. Nan Wang turned around expressionlessly. The other important figures didn't want to say anything in front of her, but their expressions were full of half-smiles, and their intentions were clear. In the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting, the Aoyama sect had always performed very well, but the main force of the tournament this time, those talented disciples of Liangwang Peak, didn't register for the tournament because of Jingjiu. Zhao Liu, who had promised to participate in the cultivation tournament, was forced to withdraw because of that incident. Since Jingjiu participated in the tournament, he was undoubtedly the representative of the Aoyama sect. However, his current performance was not only a disgrace to the Aoyama sect, but it was also hard for others to comment on his performance. Because of something that had happened many years ago, the sect master of the Kunlun sect disliked Jingjiu the most. He sneered twice as he looked at the blank painting, feeling delighted. Nan Wang glanced at him once, but didn't say anything. Dukabi tried to smooth things over hastily, saying, "I don't know what happened to him, or what happened to his companions." Not being able to solve the problem in the group and being burdened by his companions is also a problem. The sect master of the Kunlun sect continued with a sneer. Just like what Zen Master said, no matter how talented he is in the sword work, he won't be of much use if he doesn't have a good leadership ability. Nan Wang raised his eyebrows slightly, ready to say something. It was then that the young monk suddenly sighed, drawing everyone's attention. "It's said that this descendant of my old friend is very lazy," the young monk said sentimentally while looking at the painting. "It looks like he is indeed very lazy." The Zen master left the Nishiyama house and returned to the Net Perception Temple. His evaluation of Jingjiu was still echoing in the Nishiyama house. The cultivators looked at each other speechlessly, thinking that this reason, or perhaps this excuse, was truly novel. But why did it seem somewhat shameless? But since the Zen master had spoken, who dared to question him? They just had to wait and see what kind of plum blossom painting Jingjiu would produce once he was no longer lazy. At this moment, a painter hurried out from the depths of the Nishiyama house. The cultivators knew the identity of this painter. Seeing the grave expression on the painter's face, they couldn't help but be somewhat shocked, thinking, could it be that something had happened? The painter walked up to a painting that had been the focus of attention for many days, raised his brush, and casually drew a plum blossom in a blank space. The cultivators were very shocked and crowded around it. The plum blossom was very small, and when they looked down the branch, they saw a name that they did not recognize. The cultivators began to discuss in low voices. Although the plum blossom was very small, and that low-level monster of the Snowy Kingdom had not been killed by Jingjiu himself, it was still a beginning. The truly shocking matter was yet to come. The painter didn't leave after he had finished painting the plum blossom. Instead, he picked up a new brush, dipped it in ink, and drew a black line on the name solemnly. It was deathly quiet under the roof corridor. Someone had finally died in the cultivation tournament. Who was dying? Why was he in the group of Jingjiu? There was a strange peak above the clouds at the highest point of the Nishiyama house. The floating clouds outside the railing couldn't block the sceneries of Zhaoga City. The sect master of Kunlun stood by the railing, his eyes narrowed, his expression extremely cold. Dai Ying was a disciple trained by Kunlun, but he had died in such a manner. There was definitely something wrong with this. Chapter 178. In a courtyard of the Nishiyama house, the young girls of Qingrong Peak were talking about the cultivation tournament. They were talking excitedly, the shells of melon seeds flying everywhere, and the tea in the teapot had been changed many times. Nan Wang walked in with a cold expression on his face. The rules of Qingrong Peak weren't strict, but the disciples didn't dare disobey their peak master's order. They put down the teacups and melon seeds in their hands and bowed to him in unison. Sitting in a chair, Nan Wang said angrily while looking at these beautiful girls, "Look at you. No wonder you performed so badly at the sword trial and couldn't even get a place in the cultivation tournament. What are you doing in Zhaoga City with me? Are you here to have fun?" The young girls thought that they weren't qualified to participate in the cultivation tournament, and Aoyama didn't participate in the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting contests, so they came to Zhaoga City to have fun. They didn't feel worried until they found out why Nan Wang was in such a bad mood. The cultivation tournament of the plum meeting was dangerous to begin with, and young cultivation practitioners would die every time. But it was too early for someone to die this year. Moreover, Senior Master Jingjiu was at the rear, so he should be the safest. Why did the disciple of Kunlun who was with him die? The most troublesome part was that the disciple of Kunlun died right after he killed a monster of the Snowy Kingdom. It was easy for people to associate it with him, especially those conspiracy theorists. I heard that He Wei is very angry and wants us to give him an explanation. Nan Wang slapped the table and said icily, "Damn it!" The young girls stood with their heads lowered, pretending that they hadn't heard what he said. He Wei was the name of the sect master of Kunlun. Normally, Nan Wang should show him some respect. However, they were used to their peak master's unrestrained behavior. When the peak master was angry on Qingrong Peak, he would even scold the senior master, let alone the sect masters of other sections. Back when Lien Sanyue visited Aoyama, Nan Wang's temperament had been restrained a lot, but she didn't want to suppress her emotions any longer since she was surrounded by her own disciples. Death means defeat, and survival means victory. This is the cultivation tournament. What explanation does he want? She said with a sneer. A favored female disciple advised. In this situation, it's inevitable that youngest uncle will be talked about. When the news of the cold signal bird comes back, everything will be fine. The cold signal bird was the special bird of the Kunlun sect, and it wasn't afraid of the cold and dark energy. It usually recuperated in the pond of 9 hidden cold, and would only come out during the plum meeting every few years. It was responsible for monitoring the situation in the snowland and ascertaining the positions of those young cultivation practitioners. It would also participate in the most dangerous situations. In fact, Nan Wang was fully aware of this fact. The cold signal bird was the ancestor of the Kunlun immortal sect, so He Wei couldn't say that it was lying. Even if it didn't witness what had happened, there were still witnesses at the scene. The problem was, even she felt it was a bit strange. She wasn't sure if Jingjiu had anything to do with the death of that disciple of Kunlun. Considering how Zhao Liu killed people without batting an eyelid on the journey in the past few years, and the death of Function a few days ago, it was hard to tell what Jingjiu would do next. The peak that she was familiar with had become a stranger to her now. It was nightfall in Zhaoga City. The peach blossoms of the Net Perception Temple had all fallen, but the peach blossom lanterns on both sides of the passage leading to the deepest part of the temple were still lit. An old monk walked toward the end of the stone passage. He seemed to be walking slowly, but it took him only a few seconds to reach the door of the meditation room. He adjusted his breathing and pushed open the door. Seeing the scene in front of him, he let out a gratified smile. Zen Master had finally sat cross-legged that day, though he only sat on one knee, and the main reason was that he could look at the pile of wooden sticks sideways. It's not the listening ear, but the iron threadworm. The old monk knew that the matter was a bit urgent, so he did not delay and directly stated his conclusion. The old monk's Buddhist name was Shurhai. He had served the Sword King in the small city in the north for decades. When it came to understanding the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom, no one in the entire Guocheng Temple was better than him. It was also for this reason that Zen Master needed his advice. The iron threadworm was a kind of strange insect in the depths of the Snowy Kingdom. It looked similar to the listening ear and also lived in the bodies of various snow beasts. But its carapace was extremely hard, and even the swords of the Aoyama sect could not cut it open. As for its terrifying lethality, it was a world apart from the listening ear. If that Kunlun disciple had encountered the iron threadworm, he would not have been able to survive if he was completely defenseless. Zen Master lifted his head and asked confusedly, "Isn't this kind of insect always around that person?" The old monk Shurhai knew whom Zen Master referred to, so he said with a serious expression, "And the iron threadworm hasn't appeared for many years. Even though a few of them crawled into the deep underground when a monster invasion retreated, it is the beginning of summer now, and they should be sleeping. Why do they suddenly wake up?" Zen Master widened his eyes and said innocently, "I don't know the answer." The old monk Shurhai let out a bitter laugh, saying, "Is there going to be another monster invasion this year?" Hearing the word monster invasion, Zen Master's expression became a bit more serious, saying, "I've already asked young Master Duhai to go and have a look." Monk Duhai was the principal justice of the Guecheng Temple. Nobody knew that this highly achieved monk of the Zen sect had gone to the north quietly. The old monk Shurhai asked worriedly, "Should we end the cultivation tournament in advance?" This year's plum meeting was hosted by Zen Master himself. He was the only one qualified to end the cultivation tournament with one statement. Looking at the wooden sticks on the bed, Zen Master reached out his hand and grabbed one randomly, then pulled it out. The old monk Shurhai suddenly felt nervous. Hundreds of wooden sticks fell to the ground without making too much noise. Looking at the messy wooden sticks, Zen Master didn't speak for a long time, as if he couldn't make up his mind. The Guecheng Temple was good at the two-mind connection. Zen Master's cultivation state in this aspect was even more unfathomable. It was rare for him to be so hesitant. Write a letter to those who need to know and ask them to be prepared. After a moment of silence, Zen Master continued, "We'll wait for Chow Yuan's letter." The cold signal bird had a very sharp eyesight. The 4 black dots on the snowland seemed to be right in front of its eyes. It could see clearly the dust on their clothes, the remaining snow on their boots, the tiredness on their faces, and the bewilderment in their eyes. What it didn't understand was why the young man walking in the front looked so clean. There was no dust, no remaining snow, no tiredness, and no emotional fluctuation. This was something Yin Xingmao and the other two couldn't figure out. Of course, there were more things they couldn't figure out. After the death of Dai Ying, Jing Jiu, who had been sitting on the mountain for more than 10 days, seemed to have suddenly figured something out and started marching toward the snowland. Though the tragic death of their companions didn't destroy the willpower of these 3 young cultivation practitioners, they still felt bewildered, so they started to listen to Jing Jiu's ideas. Jing Jiu didn't lead them in hunting the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. They had encountered them a few times on the way, but he didn't even take a glance at them. It seemed that he was simply traveling in a hurry. Where was he going? If he was in a hurry to go somewhere, why did he walk as usual instead of speeding up or riding the sword? It was getting dark. The cold signal bird had already left. Jing Jiu halted his steps. Chapter 179. Here it is. Jing Jiu scanned the area with his sword discernment, confirming that there was no dangerous aura within 5 miles. But he couldn't be sure. He had sensed something wrong that day, but he didn't find the iron threadworm. He didn't have much experience in fighting against cultivation practitioners or monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. Yin Xingmao looked at the sky, took out the star pot, and put it on the ground. It might be cloudless tonight. She wanted to take advantage of this rare opportunity to absorb some starlight. There were more than 10 star fruits in the star pot, which could help cultivation practitioners replenish Zhen Yuan's vitality. But they didn't encounter any battles these days, so there was no need to take them out. Wu Mingzhong called out his sword and shield and put them on the snowy ground. Lu Jin silently recited a mantra, and a ball of bright yellow flame left his hand. It landed on the sword and shield and began to burn, illuminating the darkening surroundings. This flame could burn until tomorrow morning. It could bring some warmth, but it could also bring some danger. Jing Jiu didn't stop him from lighting up the flame, because he knew that psychological needs were sometimes important. This was a very practical defensive formation. The star pot could emit a clear light formation to protect the 3 of them, and the sword and shield could cooperate with the flame to attack and defend. Jing Jiu stood outside, not intending to sit down. Yin Xingmao and the other 2 were used to it, so they didn't say anything. They closed their eyes and started regulating their qi circulation with the crystals in their hands. The night was getting darker, and the snowy clouds were dispersing. Starlight fell down and entered the star pot very slowly. No one knew how long it would take for one drop to be collected. The farther they went into the snowland, the fewer snowy clouds they saw. This was different from what they knew before, so they didn't know what it meant. Jing Jiu looked at the stars in the night sky, thinking about these things. He didn't know about Zen Master's evaluation of him. There were several reasons why he didn't want to leave the mountain. Laziness was only one of them, and the key was that he didn't feel good. He always thought that feeling was the most unreliable way to put it. Only when you couldn't figure out the situation would you say the word feeling. Just like what he said when he played chess with Tong Yen. When he said the word feeling, it meant that he didn't know the current situation either, which was certainly not a good thing. In other words, as long as he had a feeling, it was a bad feeling, and bad things would always happen. Many years ago, his senior brother had told him this. There was another reason why he stayed on the mountain. He needed to ascertain the positions of the other 9 disciples of Aoyama who were participating in the cultivation tournament and the direction of their teams. Only then would he be able to deduce how he could bring them back in the shortest time possible if something were to happen. This had nothing to do with his sense of responsibility. It was something he should have done. If you open a private school in the village and take your students out for an outing, you have to keep an eye on the trees by the stream, ready at any time to scoop them up or catch them. It would not be right to say that he had no sense of responsibility. Why did the iron nematode, which shouldn't have appeared in the south of the snowfield, appear in front of him? Why didn't others encounter it? What was waiting for him in the depths of the snowfield ahead? The world was about to change? Yes, he believed that all of this had something to do with him. If others knew what he was thinking at this moment, they would definitely find it absurd. How could there be such a narcissistic person in the world? Even if you're the head of Zhongzhou School or Zen Master, you don't have the right to say something like that. Jingzhou didn't think so. He was the one who had caused the greatest disturbance in heaven and earth in the last 1,000 years. Chao Tian was safe because he had made sufficient preparations beforehand. Yet, the patch of ocean that his friend had been staring at in a daze all year long had undergone a horrifying change. Even the direction of the huge whirlpool had changed. If he hadn't come to the snowfield, he wouldn't have had to think about all this. Now that he was here, he had to take on the challenge. The night wind was extremely cold. There was no wheat on the ground, save for the perennial snow. Jingzhou took out the bamboo chair and sat down. He held the egg in front of his eyes and observed it quietly. The fog-like thin film was a bit hard, and he could vaguely see what was inside. Nothing could be heard from the inside of the egg, but Jingzhou knew that the thing was still alive, which was quite interesting. It was indeed a strange life form, which could survive for such a long time in a place isolated from the air and the energy of heaven and earth. The round turtle was the only one among the principal guards of Aoyama who could do this. Was it because its vitality was so strong, or was it because of the protective effect of the thin film? Jingzhou swiped the thin film with his forefinger. The thin film split open like the skin of a drum, and then it withered visibly, exposing the inside of the egg. It was a pure white little beetle with 6 thin and delicate legs and a small head, half of which was hidden in the shell. Its shell was translucent, and its simple internal structure could be vaguely seen. The little beetle was stiff and motionless, without any energy, and it didn't have the heartbeat of a human or a demon. It should be dead. Come back to life. Jingzhou focused his awareness on the little beetle. The little beetle came back to life. Its 6 thin legs quivered rapidly, as if it wanted to prove that it had tried its best to come back to life. Jingzhou put the little beetle back into the shell and took it out a while later. He found it was still alive, finding it even more interesting. Jingzhou turned his hand over. The little beetle drifted down to the snowy ground along with the cold wind. It and the snow were both white, so it was hard to notice them when they were mixed together. The little beetle slowly stretched out its 6 thin legs and crawled toward the distance. Jingzhou didn't pay any attention to it. The little beetle stopped at the same spot, as if judging something, and crawled back to the bamboo chair in the end. Jingzhou looked at it. The little beetle sensed Jingzhou's will, so it didn't dare disobey. It turned over with a paw, spreading its 6 legs and exposing its abdomen. Jingzhou looked at it carefully, his line of sight moving from the shell to the joints. The little beetle started trembling. It didn't have any spiritual awareness, and it had just been born, but it felt an extreme fear instinctively. It was because the places Jingzhou could see were the weakest parts of their race. Jingzhou was the center of the discussion about the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting. Even Lo Huainan was mentioned less often than Jingzhou. It was not because his performance was better than the others, but because he didn't do anything. The death of the Kunlun disciple had nothing to do with Jingjiao, but it still had some influence. From Zhaoga City to the Snowland to the north of the Ink Sea, many people were talking about Jingjiao. Of course, the iron thread bug that shouldn't have appeared was also mentioned. Though we haven't encountered the iron thread bug yet, we're getting close to the forbidden land of the Snowy Kingdom, so we might run into some trouble at any time. Bai Zhao said, "You might have to hang the bell to check the enemies for a long time on the way, which will consume a lot of your spiritual source. Can you handle it?" The female disciple of the Platonist sect said, "I need 8 hours of rest every day." "Okay, I'll take your place for 8 hours. Thank you for your hard work." Bai Zhao looked at the other side and said, "If you encounter the same situation again, you should attack a bit slower to make sure that Big Brother Mo can control it first. The snow bug doesn't have a shell, but its body is covered with sticky liquid, so it's hard to cut in half." Understood. The disciple of Aoyama, Yao Song's Han, was in this group. This place was a patch of snowy hills. The black shadow of the mountain was intermittently visible in front of them, but it was still a long distance away. Bai Zhao sat down, and her 4 companions stood around her, listening to her plan carefully. The snowflakes ruffled the white veil on her face. Chapter 180. Bai Zhao's voice was soft, and her expression was gentle, but her companions listened to her carefully and patiently, seemingly convinced. Even Yao Song's Han was like that. The cultivation states of the members of this team were relatively ordinary. Apart from Bai Zhao, the strongest was Yao Song's Han. They didn't have super fighting capacity like Lo Huainan, Tong Lu, or Guanan Shan or Gu Han, but they had achieved excellent results in the cultivation tournaments. They had completed most of the painting of plum blossoms through blood in Nishiyama House, and they had one Zen master's praise. Bai Zhao's ability to calculate and command was too strong. Her expression and words were so amiable and persuasive that all her companions believed in her judgment. She was probably a natural leader. Because of her calmness, her companions, who had been a bit uneasy because of the iron thread worms, also calmed down and began to set up the formation. Bai Zhao raised her head and looked at the mountain in the distance. The cold wind blew again, rolling up the snowflakes and hitting her white gauze. The female disciple of the Platonist sect asked with her eyes if she needed a blanket. Bai Zhao shook her head with a smile, indicating that she didn't need it. She tightened her clothes. In fact, she wasn't as confident as she looked. That disciple of the Kunlun named Dai Ying died too early. But since the cultivation tournament hadn't stopped, it shouldn't be a problem with a monster tide, so there shouldn't be too much danger. Then, she thought of something, and her lips curled up into a happy smile. She asked her companions, "Where are they today?" Yao Song's Han took the magic implement from one of his companions and glanced at it. He walked to her side and said with a strange expression, "They're still more than 60 miles away from us." A few days ago, they found that a team was moving in a strange way, as if they were coming toward them. That team didn't move very fast, but if they kept moving, they would meet in 2 days, right in front of the Black Mountain in the north. Though the competition in the cultivation tournament was fierce, it was impossible for human cultivation practitioners to kill each other. Yao Songshan's strange expression wasn't because he was alarmed, but because Jingjiao was in that team. The morning light came a little late. Bai Zhao and his team continued to venture deeper into the snowfield, searching for monsters from the Snow Kingdom to hunt. The path ahead would certainly be more dangerous, but that was the meaning of the law battles. Dusk came a little early. Her companions gathered around Bai Zhao and began to listen to her soft voice. Today, they had killed 2 ordinary snow foot beasts. They were very cautious during the battle, afraid that something unexpected might happen. But in the end, they didn't find any listening ears or iron nematodes in the prey's carapace. His companions spread out to prepare the array. Bai Zhao sat in the wind and snow, thinking about this matter, and was even more puzzled. Why didn't all the cultivators who participated in the cultivation tournament encounter the iron nematode worms, but Jing Jiao and his companions, who set off many days later, encountered them. "Where is Jing Jiao now?" she asked reflexively. Yao Songzhan took a look at the magic tool and said, "It's about 15 kilometers away from us, southwest." The other three looked at Yao Songzhan after exchanging a look. They knew that Bai Zhao was very concerned about the route of that team, but today she asked Jing Jiao directly instead of them. What did this mean? "Don't look at me. I really don't know anything." Yao Songzhan said, "As far as I know, Senior Master Jing Jiao and Senior Master Liu left the mountains and traveled for 2 years. They spent the rest of the time cultivating in Aoyama, and they didn't meet any outsiders." Then they remembered that there was a Zhao Liu in Aoyama. The morning light came a little later than the day before. During the day, they didn't encounter any monsters of the Snowy Kingdom, and even the snow had stopped. It was quiet in heaven and earth, or in other words, dead silence. The Black Mountain Range was getting closer, looking so quiet and intimidating. There was a valley in the middle of the Black Mountain Range, leading to a farther place, which was the real Snowy Kingdom. Looking at that place, Bai Zhao felt a strong sense of alarm, saying, "Light the fire." The twilight came a little earlier than the day before. The night had come. According to the previous practice, Jing Jiao should have called a halt, but he didn't today. As a result, Yin Xingma and the other two kept moving forward. Jing Jiao walked at the back. The three young cultivation practitioners cooperated very well, and they hadn't encountered any ferocious monsters like the iron threadbug recently. Jing Jiao opened his palm, and a little beetle jumped onto his palm. The shell of the little beetle was still pure white, but it had become much harder in the last few days. It was no longer as fragile and tender as it was when it was just born. Jing Jiao noticed that the longer it stayed in the cold wind or the lower the temperature of the outside world, the faster the shell would harden. As for what the little beetle ate, Jing Jiao didn't know yet, because he had never cared about it. Anyway, it was still alive. Jing Jiao suddenly sensed something and pulled back his palm, saying, "Someone is being besieged." The three people in front of him stopped and looked at him in surprise. There couldn't be any deviant cultivation practitioners on the snowland at this time, so they could only be companions participating in the cultivation tournament. Wu Mingzhong asked, "Where?" "How far?" "Northeast, 11 miles away." Jing Jiao said it without looking at it. That was where he wanted to go. It was also for this reason that he didn't call a halt when the night came. Yin Xingma asked with a pale face, "What should we do?" After walking on the snowland for so many days, the three young cultivation practitioners were not as nervous as they were at the beginning. But after all, they hadn't experienced a single battle in the last few days, and the only impression they had was the tragic death of dying. Suddenly knowing that their companions participating in the cultivation tournament were besieged by monsters, they subconsciously felt a sense of fear. Jing Jiao untied the iron sword on his back and said, "You stay here. I'll go and have a look." Normally, it would only take a moment to travel more than 5 miles on a sword, but they were already in the middle of the snowland. Although there were no snow clouds these days, the chaotic wind in the sky was more violent, and they were getting closer and closer to the ground. Riding on a sword, they could only fly 100 feet above the ground at most, which made it easy for them to be attacked by those monsters with amazing elasticity. Yin Xingma and the other two looked at each other and made up their minds, saying, "Let's go together." Jing Jiao was a bit surprised. Wu Mingzhong called out his sword and shield. The four of them stepped on it. A gust of extremely cold wind blew in the valley, and the flames in the bonfire were almost extinguished by the pressure. A pearl rose into the night sky, emitting a milky white light, illuminating the ground within a radius of more than 300 feet. Bai Zhao sat on the snowy ground, her white gauze stained with blood, looking very weak. She had actually suffered a serious injury. Strange sounds could be heard everywhere in the darkness of the night, like metal rubbing against each other, or like a broken gong vibrating at a high speed, making one's heart palpitate. Chapter 181. The moment the pearl rose to the sky, Bai Zhao saw many black shadows, but they moved so fast that he couldn't count their numbers with his spiritual awareness. The snowfield chosen as the venue of the cultivation tournament this year was the ancient battlefield where the human race fought against the monster tide. It had been cleaned by the swordsmen of the human race many times, so there shouldn't be any powerful monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. She thought the real danger would come after entering the Black Mountain, but she didn't expect so many snow-foot monsters to be hiding in the depths of the snowfield. Besides, these snow-foot monsters were all in high states. The snow-foot monster that attacked her just now only had 3 feet, but could jump dozens of feet easily, as fast as lightning. Snowfoot monsters of this level didn't have any intelligence, but their fighting instincts were extremely powerful. The 3-legged snow-foot monster came to the battlefield from underground and attacked her at the perfect time. It was the moment when she asked the disciples of the Platonist sect to support their companions and prepare to set up a defensive formation. In the end, she killed the snow-foot monster with her magic treasure, but she was wounded at the cost of it. 2 of her companions were wounded at the very beginning. The clear bell kept ringing in the night, helping the wounded to protect their Taoist heart and warning them where the snowfoot monsters were attacking from underground. The female disciple of the Platonist sect sat cross-legged on the snowfield with her eyes closed. The efficacy of the elixir she had just taken had been used up, and she didn't know how long Zhen Yuan could hold on. Following the guidance of the bell, a streak of cyan, sword light suddenly flew away and then returned. Looking at the sword light, Bai Zhao showed an expression of appreciation. Aoyama's sword was really good. Yao Songzhan looked at the flying sword that had returned to him and was relieved to make sure that the sword was not corroded by the blood of the snowfoot monsters. He looked at Bai Zhao and asked, "How did it go?" He really admired this girl in white who looked so weak and delicate. She was indeed the pearl of the sect master of the Zhongzhou school. She had a strong leadership and commanding ability, and her magic treasure was of a high level. She was also good at setting up formations. The bright pearl in the night sky wasn't just for illumination. It was also an array pivot. Stimulated by Zhao's soul consciousness, it formed an extremely firm barrier. This barrier blocked most of the snow-foot monsters in the darkness of the night. The snow-foot monsters that came out from underground were killed by him and his senior sister from the Platonist sect. However, the Platonist sect senior sister Zhen Yuan's energy consumption was too fast, and Bai Zhao was injured. They did not know how long they could maintain this formation. Bai Zhao looked weak, but her eyes were calm and confident. She was confident that she would be able to hold on until dawn with all her companions after they survived the initial attack of the snowfoot beasts. Even if the cold signal bird didn't find them, there would be other reinforcements. Even if nothing happened, it shouldn't be too big of a problem. Just as she was thinking about these things, she suddenly felt her surroundings become even colder. Earlier, she had noticed that a gust of cold wind was blowing through the canyon, and the fire was almost extinguished. It was indeed extremely cold in the snowland, but such a low temperature was still rare. A patch of thick fog gushed out of the canyon, shrouding the snowland where they were. This fog was even colder than the wind just now, as if there were countless ice crystals in it. Even though they were cultivation practitioners, their exposed skins still felt a prickling pain. The flames were descending at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bai Zhao said with a solemn expression, "We might not be able to hold on much longer." No one knew what this fog was made of, but it was extremely cold and thick. Even the soul consciousness would be frozen in it. Bai Zhao's soul consciousness was connected to the bright pearl in the night sky, so he could sense it most clearly. Without the soul consciousness, the formation would naturally dissipate. Yao Songzhan raised his eyebrows slightly and walked to the front of Bai Zhao. Qing Jian followed him. The female disciple of the Platonist sect opened her eyes. She and the other 2 injured cultivation practitioners supported each other and came to the 2 sides of Bai Zhao, calling out their last protective magic treasure. The fog grew thicker, and the bonfire grew dimmer and dimmer until it was extinguished. The bright pearl grew dimmer and dimmer until it couldn't be seen anymore. The night fog blocked everything, and the friction sounds rang out again, more frequent this time, and much closer to them. Would this patch of fog disperse? Isaiah was thinking about this. The cultivation tournament was, of course, a dangerous trial. The masters wouldn't get involved unless it was a critical moment. However, the battles were ever-changing. If something happened, even the masters in the state of Washington wouldn't be able to get involved in time. Similar situations had happened many times in the past years. So many participants would die in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting. Moreover, this cold fog came too suddenly, too eerie, and too dreadful. She had never seen such a thing in the records. If her big brother were here, what would he do? In the darkness, her hand fell to her waist and gripped two cold things. There were 5 people here, not enough. She thought to herself as she let go of her hands. The moment she let go of her hands, a voice came out in the darkness of the night. Even in such a dangerous situation, the voice was still so calm and emotionless, even a bit cold, but it was convincing. Put away the bell. The female disciple of the Platonist sect recalled the voiceless bell reflexively. The sound of something breaking through the air rang out in the darkness of the night. A heavy object landed on the snowy ground, splashing up many snowflakes, which landed on Yao Songshan's face. Compared to the coldness in the thick fog, these snowflakes made him feel a bit warm. The calm voice rang out again. Raise the shield. Yao Songshan could vaguely see a dark shadow about 2 meters in front of him, the height of 2 men standing up. Soon after, there was a loud thud, followed by a muffled grunt. The voice rang out again without any hesitation. Star pot. Light the fire. Broken cold branch. The bonfire was lit up again. Though the fire was a bit weak, it still illuminated the surroundings. The fire of Jin Yuan could hold up for a while in the extremely cold fog. A blue star pot was placed on the ground in front of the bonfire. Starlight shot out from the mouth of the pot, enshrouding the group. Just a few steps away from the starlight barrier, a snow-foot monster was struggling to stand up. Yao Songshan made a gesture of the sword. Qing Jin broke through the fog and pierced through the head of the snow-foot monster, leaving a trail of green blood. Qing Jin didn't fly back, but continued to travel in the cold fog. For some reason, the power of the sword light seemed to be stronger with the coldness in the fog. It killed another 2 snow-foot monsters in an instant. Hearing the words, broken cold branch, Yao Songshan confirmed who the voice belonged to. Broken cold branch was the 7th move of the flowing snow sword style of the Shangda Peak. Only the disciples of Aoyuan knew that he was a disciple of the Shangda Peak before he joined Liangwang Peak. Except for Yao Songshan, the other 3 didn't have time to react because the situation had changed too fast. Bai Zhao knew who the newcomer was. Judging from the real fire and the star pot, she recognized that the newcomer was a fellow cultivator from the Xiantian sect and the star-picking tower. There were 2 of them in Jingjiu's team. What about him? The snow-foot monsters retreated into the darkness again, not knowing whether it was because of the firelight, the star pot, or Yao Songshan's flowing snow sword art that had suddenly become more powerful. The cold fog was too thick, and the light from the fire could not illuminate too far. The people looked around, but they could not see anything. They could only hear the sound. It was the sound of iron swords tearing through the air, the sound of metal and stone cracking, and the horrible screams of the snow-foot monsters. But there were so many snow-foot monsters in the darkness. Could he hold them off? Why didn't he enter the range of the star pot's defense and take a break? Listening to the voice in the night fog, Yao Songshan was very worried. He wanted to rush out several times, but thinking that he hadn't received any orders, he forced himself to hold back. The voices in the fog became more and more frequent, and then gradually became further and further away, until they finally disappeared without a trace. Yao Songshan couldn't stand it anymore and said, "I want to go out and have a look." Bai Zhao said, "He didn't say." Yao Songshan said, "I'm worried about him." Bai Zhao said, "I believe in him." The young cultivation practitioners waited anxiously, treating their wounds, taking turns to rest, and resisting the coldness in the fog. They were in no mood to talk the whole night. After a long time, the fog finally showed signs of dissipating. The female disciple of the Platonist sect opened her eyes and looked at the faint morning light in the sky, a smile on her face as if she had just survived a disaster. Footsteps were heard outside the fog. Everybody looked in the direction of the sound. Jingjiu walked out of the fog. The faint firelight and the morning light fell on his face at the same time. Bai Zhao looked at him in silence, thinking that he was really good looking. Chapter 182. As the sun rose, the cold fog finally dispersed. People looked out through the fog and saw over a dozen snow-foot monsters lying on the ground dead. Among them, the snow-foot monster of a higher state was killed by Bai Zhao with a magic treasure, and only half of its body was left. 4 snow-foot monsters with their heads pierced through were killed by Yao Songzhan with the Aoyama swordsmanship. The rest of the snow-foot monsters were even more miserable. Their limbs were broken and their armor was cracked. Green blood was flowing everywhere. The stones stained by the poisonous blood were bubbling and making sizzling sounds. It was a horrible scene. What was more shocking was that there were more snow-foot monsters' corpses in the periphery. There were 1 or 2 corpses every 100 feet, and the corpses extended to thousands of feet away. People could even vaguely see similar scenes in the distance. How many snow-foot monsters were killed? People finally realized that the disappearance of the sound outside the fog last night wasn't because something had happened. Was it because he was chasing after the snow-foot monsters? They looked at Jingjiu with shock in their eyes, including Yao Songzhan. The fog last night was so cold that it could even block the spiritual senses, which was extremely disadvantageous to cultivators. However, the snow-foot monsters could fight with their instincts and were not affected. How'd he do all of this? Jingjiu and Bai Zhao stood side by side. One was wearing a white robe. The other was wearing a white robe. The young people smiled when they saw this scene. Who wouldn't like such a beautiful scene? The proud daughter of Zhongzhou School and the genius swordsman of Aoyama sect. They were a perfect match. Who do you support? The female disciple of Platonist sect stared at Yao Songzhan and asked with her eyes wide open. I don't know what you're talking about, Yao Songzhan said. The female disciple of Platonist sect curled her lips to show her disdain. Yao Songzhan thought expressionlessly. Even though Miss Bai Zhao was a good person, he had to support senior Uncle Zhao. The scene of Jingjiu and Bai Zhao standing side by side was beautiful, but that was not what they saw. The ground was covered with the remains of the snow-foot monsters, and the green juice that was even more disgusting than the moss was smeared on the white snow. But they didn't care, and their initial conversation had nothing to do with the scene in front of them. That night, you promised me that you wouldn't touch Bulow Lin for the time being, Bai Zhao said. Jingjiu appeared just in time. She didn't even use her gold core, and her injuries weren't serious. She quickly recovered after taking some medicinal pills. Jingjiu thought about what she had said that night and said, I didn't touch Bulow Lin. Bai Zhao looked at him and said seriously, You don't have proof that Shi Fengshan is involved in this matter, so you shouldn't touch him. Jingjiu said, You don't have any evidence. What he meant was that many people in the Zhongzhou school suspected that Shi Fengshan was forced to his death by Jingjiu. Bai Zhao said, You should know very well that Shi Fengshan alone couldn't persuade Bulow Lin. Yes, Jingjiu said, I know he has connections with the people of Jing Xian's manor. The expression on Bai Zhao's face grew even more serious as he asked, Are you going to touch the crown prince without proof? Jingjiu said, As a matter of fact, it was I who touched him first, and that's why these things happened. Therefore, whether from the crown prince's point of view or from the other side, Zhao Liu was assassinated because of Jingjiu. Bai Zhao felt that she needed to think about the content of this statement carefully later. She stopped discussing this issue and pointed to the holes in the snow, saying the snow-foot monsters last night didn't come out from the valley. They came out from deep underground. What are you trying to say? Jingjiu asked. Bai Zhao said, The iron threadworm you encountered and the snow-foot monster last night are probably the things left behind in the deep underground during the monster invasion. They could sleep for so long? Jingjiu asked. As long as they were buried deep enough, Bai Zhao said. Then why did they come out? Jingjiu asked. They couldn't have been awakened by the cultivation battles. Bai Zhao said, I don't think they wanted to attack us, but to return to the Snowy Kingdom. They just happened to run into us. Even though I don't know what happened in the Snowy Kingdom, it must be a big deal for the monsters that have been sleeping for hundreds of years to wake up all at once. Jingjiu thought that he really should come and take a look. At noon, the sunlight was too strong, not suitable for meditation and cultivation. The masters and disciples of various sects walked out from the courtyards of the Nishiyama house one after another. They strolled to the roofed corridor and admired the dozens of paintings of plum blossoms, as they had done in the past few days. Of course, they were most concerned about the performance of their own disciples. Apart from them, they were also concerned about Lo Huainan by Zhao and Tong Lu. Bai Zhao's painting of plum blossoms was praised by the Zen master. Lo Huainan and Tong Lu's painting had the most plum blossoms, and it was said that they had traveled the furthest into the snowland. Jingjiu's painting of plum blossoms had also received a lot of attention, but there had been no change for several days, so people's interest had gradually faded. The painter walked out from the tall building built against the mountain, and the crowd followed him. They found that the painter finally stopped in front of Jingjiu's painting of plum blossoms, and they couldn't help but feel surprised. Had that team finally found something new? Or had someone died again? What was strange was that the painter didn't pick up his brush and start painting the plum blossoms. Instead, he stared at the paper, which was mostly blank, with a blank expression on his face. After a while, he glanced at the file in his hand, as if he wanted to confirm it, and then he continued to stare blankly at the painting. Finally, a cultivator couldn't help but ask, "What's going on?" The painter said with a distressed expression, "I don't know how to paint." Hearing this, the crowd was somewhat taken aback, thinking that whether it was adding plum blossoms or crossing out names, it was just a matter of moving the brush. What was so difficult about it? The wind blew. A dozen or so important figures of the cultivation world came to the scene. The sect master of Kunlun, the governor of Ozawa, the abbot of the Baotong Zen Temple, Nan Wang, and the Zhongzhou school, which had rarely appeared in the past few days, also had an elder in the realm of deification. The absence of the bell meant that there was no need to clear the scene. The cultivators bowed and made way for them to enter the corridor. They didn't leave, feeling even more baffled, wondering what had happened. Nan Wang looked at the painter and asked, "Why haven't you painted it yet?" The painter said with a bitter smile, "I really don't know how to paint it. Should I give it a try?" Hejan walked in from the courtyard. His talent was needless to say, and he had won second place in the painting competition at the plum meeting. But for some reason, he didn't participate in the cultivation tournament this year. The sect master of Kunlun looked at him and said icily, "You've done something." Nan Wang said, "Paint it better." Hejan bowed with a faint smile and walked to the front of the painting. He took the file from the painter's hand and lowered his head to read it. He had already guessed what was going on, but he was still bewildered when he read the words on the file. Soon, a bitter smile appeared on his face, as he thought it was no wonder that the painting was so difficult to paint. He thought for a while looking at the painting, then took the brush from the painter's hand, dipped it in some cinnabar, and waved it toward the painting with a slight shake of his wrist. Pa, 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 pa. The frequent sounds of the brush falling like raindrops rang out. The bright red paint fell on the white paper, forming speckles that looked like raindrops. The crowd was startled, wondering what Hejan was doing. Hejan didn't pay any attention to them. He picked up another thin brush, dipped it in some ink, and continued painting with a calm mind. A line of ink appeared among the red speckles on the paper. The line of ink was very thin and faint. If one didn't look at it carefully, they might not even notice it. Gradually, the crowd realized what he was doing. It was a plum branch stretching to the distance. What about the bright red speckles? Were they the plum blossoms on the branch? How many plum blossoms were there? It was quiet in the corridor. The crowd was shocked, speechless. Chapter 183. It was deathly quiet both inside and outside the roof corridor. Countless gazes followed the tip of Hejan's brush. The crowd was shocked and also bewildered. It didn't take long before Jean stopped his brush and nodded satisfactorily after observing it for a while. He handed the brush back to the painter, took the wine jar from his waist, and took a sip from it, exhaling comfortably. The sect master of Kunlun sneered and left without saying anything. Your painting is not bad. You didn't embarrass yourself. Having said this, Nan Wang left the roof corridor as well. It sounded like she was praising Jean, but everybody knew that she was talking about Jingjio for all the people present. However, Jean's painting was indeed excellent. The cold branch was twisted and straight, reaching toward the dark gray sky in the distance. The red plum blossoms on the branch looked like the spreading flames. They were right in front of the eyes, but they seemed to be far away. There were many blank spaces in this painting before, but more plum blossoms had to be filled in today. According to the usual painting method, even the smallest plum blossoms couldn't be filled in. Jean used a clever method, which could be called a clever one, to solve this tricky problem. More importantly, the artistic conception was very profound and worth reflecting on. The cultivation practitioners watching from outside the corridor came back to their senses and came forward. They discussed the details of the painting, unable to calm down their astonishment. What's going on? Why did he paint so many plum blossoms? How many are there? How to count them? The cultivation practitioners could only tell that the plum blossoms came from Jing Jio's branch, but they couldn't count the number of plum blossoms. The painter, who was packing up the brush and paint, said, I don't know how many plum blossoms, young master, he has painted. All I know is that there are 77 plum blossoms on the file. Hearing this number, the cultivation practitioners couldn't help but take a few deep breaths, wondering how it was possible. Which participant of so many plum meetings could kill so many monsters of the Snowy Kingdom in one night? Did something go wrong? The painter sighed, saying, it was the cold signal bird who counted them. They only counted 20 themselves. It was quiet again in front of the roof corridor. After a long while, a gloomy voice broke out. I think we can announce the winner of this year's law tournament in advance. Before today, Lo Huainan and Tong Lu had the highest number of plum blossoms. Both of them were close to 30, far behind Jing Jio. Just as this cultivator had said, there was no longer any suspense in the law tournament. Now, it seemed that they only needed to wait for the other cultivators to finish their plum paintings. But how did Jing Jio do it? It was rumored that he was a talented swordsman of the Aoyama sect, and there was even a rumor that he might be the successor of experiencing the mortal world at the Guocheng Temple. The problem was that he was still too young, and he didn't have many amazing achievements before the plum meeting. His fame and influence were lower than Zhao Liu and Zhuo Rizhui, and he was also lower than Lo Huainan, Tong Yin, and Bai Zhao. Who would have thought that he would bring such a huge shock to the cultivation world overnight? I don't think he will win first place in the cultivation tournament. A cultivation practitioner of the external department of Zhongzhou School said with a gloomy expression, the standard of the cultivation tournament is to finish a plum painting. The word finish here is perfect, not too many. Though this statement sounded sour, it was actually quite reasonable. Many people still remembered that the Broadsword King participated in the plum meeting as a regular disciple of the Windy Broadsword sect many years ago and won first place in the cultivation tournament after defeating the swordsmen of Zhongzhou School, Aoyama's sect, and Shuai Nunnery, shocking the whole of Chaotian. There was only one plum blossom in his painting at the time. How could a plum blossom be called perfect? It was because the plum blossom was too big. During the cultivation tournament, he was unlucky enough to encounter a snow worm of the King's State. Then, he was lucky enough to kill the snow worm of the King's State and survive. That painting was very famous. If a big plum blossom covered the whole painting, it wouldn't look good, and it couldn't be called perfect. The method used by that painter was similar to what Jean was doing today. He only drew half a plum blossom on the paper. The half-bloody plum blotted out the sky, and it was so magnificent that nothing else could be compared to it. Could Jing Jio's plum blossom painting be called perfect? Many people looked at that cultivation practitioner with a mocking expression in their eyes. Of course it was perfect. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was still perfect. It was because it was Zen Master who commented on the plum blossom painting this year. They all heard Zen Master's comment on Jingjiu the other day. Jingjiu didn't show any performance at the time, but Zen Master used such an excuse to support him. Moreover, Jingjiu's performance was so outstanding. If Zen Master were to see this painting, first place in the cultivation tournament might have already been announced. One could say that Zen Master was biased, but the spiritual master Jingyang was half a teacher to Zen Master, and Jingjiu was the personal disciple of the spiritual master Jingyang. The cultivation practitioner was somewhat angry at being stared at by the crowd and said, in short, his companion doesn't even have a single flower. I can't accept this. Someone said emotionally, whether you accept it or not, it looks like Lo Huainan really won't be able to take first place this year. How surprising. Hejan admired his painting, taking a sip of wine every time he looked at it. It didn't take long for him to drink half a pot of wine. The more he looked at the plum blossom painting, the more he liked it. Hearing their discussion, he shook his head and said, Tong Yin couldn't even beat Jingjiu in chess. What makes you think that Lo Huainan can beat him in the cultivation tournament? It was unclear whether Zen Master had seen the plum blossom painting or not. The cultivation tournament continued. The young cultivation practitioners participating in the cultivation tournament encountered some unexpected situations in the snowland, just like what Jingjiu and Bai Zhao had encountered. Those snowy beasts that shouldn't have woken up in the summer and those dreadfully cold and thick fog brought them a lot of trouble. Gradually, serious casualties started to appear. Bai Zhao sent his judgment back to Zhaoga City. It was unclear what the masters of various sects thought about it, but they didn't say anything except to remind them to be careful of the cold fog. The purpose of the cultivation tournament was to strengthen the Tao heart of the orthodox disciples through a life-and-death test. It was impossible for the tournament to be terminated prematurely because of some dangers. The last time the cultivation tournament was terminated prematurely was 200 years ago because of the large monster invasion, and the situation was many times more severe than this time. The young people participating in the cultivation tournament continued to advance bravely and determinedly toward the deep part of the snowland. The group of Lo Huainan and Tong Lu had already penetrated hundreds of miles into the Black Mountain Range. It was then that another incident occurred, causing another round of discussion in the Nishiyama house. Some young cultivation practitioners suddenly stopped, and they didn't leave the entrance of the valley for 2 whole days. What did they want to do? What troubled the masters of the cultivation circle the most was that, according to the news from the front, it was Jingjiu who asked those young cultivation practitioners to stop. Chapter 184. It was late at night. 7 young people sat around the fire. They were in the mountains, with steep cliffs on both sides. The sky was compressed into a line. The snow clouds that had disappeared for many days appeared again, covering everything. The starlight didn't come from the stars, but from Yin Qingma's star pot. The bell hung in the distance in silence, sensing the change of the qi of heaven and earth and ready to ring at any time. Yao Songzhan sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. Qing Jian was summoned. Silence was placed on his knees to rest. The other 6 were also resting, but they couldn't help but look at the rock dozens of feet away from them from time to time. Jingjiu and Bai Zhao sat on the rock. When they entered the mountains that day, Jingjiu asked them to stop. They didn't understand. They thought that if they continued to hunt the snow monsters, they might be able to secure the first place in the cultivation tournament. Why did they stop? Yet they respected Jingjiu very much, and Bai Zhao didn't object to it. As a result, the 9 of them stopped in the valley. At dusk, a dozen snow-foot monsters suddenly rushed from the outside of the mountain, trying to pass through the valley. Jingjiu didn't take any action. He only said a few words at the critical moment. Bai Zhao showed his almost perfect leadership ability again. He led his companions and killed all the snow-foot monsters. Under her command, the 8 of them were much more powerful than 2 small teams combined. It was because she could maximize the abilities of her companions and cooperate with them. What if she was asked to command hundreds of cultivation practitioners at the same time? There were 8 of them because Jingjiu didn't participate in the battle. He only said a few words at the critical moment. It was like the night when he taught Yao Songzhan how to use the sword. It was just a simple instruction, but Wu Mingzhong and the others felt the battle was much easier. Jingjiu seemed to know how the snow-foot monsters would attack in advance. He knew the weakest part of the snow-foot monster shells, and he was very precise. This really shocked them speechless. They thought that even their own masters might not be able to do this. I didn't believe that you were the successor of Guoqing Temple's worldly experience disciple, but now I'm starting to believe it. Only the cultivators who had killed countless monsters of the Snowy Kingdom would have such an understanding of them. As far as I know, this should be your first time here, so there's only one explanation. You've received guidance from an expert. An expert? Of course I'm talking about the Sword Saint. You're wrong. I'm just better at cutting things off. Then how do you know where to cut? Everything in the world has its weakness. My eyesight is pretty good, so I'll be able to discover it after a few days of observation. These few days, Jingjiu often took out the little white beetle to look at and observe it. Although the larva had not evolved, he could still see a lot of things he wanted to see. Bai Zhao suddenly asked, "Are you in the upper state of the undefeated?" Jingjiu said, "Initial state." The undefeated state was the state of Aoyama. According to the grading system of the Zhongzhou school, the initial state was the initial state of the elixir realm. How could someone in this state kill so many snow-foot monsters in one night? Bai Zhao didn't believe it at all. Jingjiu said, "Maybe the swordsmanship I've been practicing is more suitable for this kind of thing." "When did you discover it?" Bai Zhao asked. "That night," Jingjiu answered. He was serious. He wasn't joking. It was indeed that night when he killed so many snow-foot monsters that he realized he was good at or suitable for this kind of thing. The attacks of the snow-foot monsters were too slow for him, and the poisonous blood, which was the most troublesome for the cultivators, had no effect on him. The most important thing was that the extremely cold fog was very terrifying for the cultivators, but it was helpful for him. He was not afraid of the cold fog. On the contrary, he could use the fog to cover his body so that the snow-foot monsters couldn't see him. That night, he killed so many snow-foot monsters. It was unimaginable for anyone else, but it was too easy for him. Under the cover of the cold fog, he walked to the back of a snow-foot monster and slashed down with his sword. The snow-foot monster died. He walked to the back of another snow-foot monster and raised the iron sword in his hand again. One sword for one. What was so difficult about it? The only trouble was that he was stained with too much poisonous blood that night, so he didn't feel comfortable. No matter how clean the sword fire was, he could still smell it. So he found a snow lake and used the sword fire to heat up the water and took a careful bath. Come to think of it, this should be the first time he took a bath since he entered Aoyama. "Why did you stop?" Bai Zhao finally got to the point. Jingjiu woke up from his wandering thoughts and said, "Waiting for someone." Bai Zhao didn't ask anything else, glancing at his wrist. She remembered clearly that there was a sword bracelet on Jingjiu's wrist. It disappeared the day before yesterday and reappeared today. In the early morning of the next day, four young cultivation practitioners appeared at the entrance of the valley. The four looked exhausted. It seemed that they had been walking for a whole night. The snowland was even more dangerous at night. They didn't know where the pressure came from and why they were so anxious. Seeing Bai Zhao and the others, the four felt a bit surprised. They stepped forward and saluted each other. One of them was a disciple of Aoyama from Liangwang Peak, named Lei Ilkyung. Seeing Yao Songzhan, he stepped forward and greeted him happily. "Big brother." Yao Songzhan smiled, motioning for him to meet Jingjiu first. It was not until then that Lei Ilkyung saw Jingjiu. He was a bit startled, showing an unnatural expression on his face. But he still saluted earnestly, saying, "Greetings, Senior Master." Jingjiu looked at the four and said, "I'll give you an hour to rest, and then we'll set off together." Lei Ilkyung didn't understand, and neither did the other young people. They thought that according to the rules of the cultivation tournament, each group should fight separately, and even if they met occasionally, they should separate. Why did Jingjiu say they'd set off together? Among the four, a disciple of Zhongzhou school, was telling Bai Zhao about what happened the night before. Hearing Jingzhou's words, he asked in surprise, "Big sister, what's going on?" Bai Zhao hadn't figured out Jingzhou's intention yet, so he said, "Let's follow him first." Even if Lei Il Kyung was unwilling, he couldn't disobey the master's order. That disciple of Zhongzhou school listened to Bai Zhao completely. The other two knew about Jingzhou's amazing performance the night before, so they couldn't raise any objection. But they were worried that the masters of Nishiyama House might judge them for violating the rules if they found out. An hour later, Jingzhou walked toward the inside of the valley. There were many mountain paths in the valley, some of which led to the peak covered with ice and snow that hadn't melted for 10,000 years, and some of which led to extremely narrow and dark natural caves. Jingzhou walked directly toward one of the mountain paths, as if he didn't even think about it. The cold wind stirred the broken stones between the cliffs and occasionally blew off some accumulated snow. The others stood up, looked at each other, and followed him with many doubts. By dusk, many people finally knew why Jingzhou had chosen this mountain path. It was because at the bottom of the cliff in the distance, another group was setting up a formation and getting ready to rest. Seeing Jingzhou and the others appear, a surprised voice burst out in the group. "Senior Master Jing?" Chapter 185. The painting of plum blossoms had some new changes. Besides Jingzhou, the other three had also made some progress. A few red plum blossoms were added to the branches nearby, looking quite pleasing. Compared with the red plum blossoms in the distance, the scene was perfect. The newly added plum blossoms were painted by Hejan himself. After finishing the painting, he enjoyed it for a while, drank up the wine in the jar, and left the West Mountain. The cultivation practitioners of various sects stopped in front of the painting, feeling speechless. They knew that Jingzhou would win first place in the cultivation tournament at this year's plum meeting. The news was soon spread to Aoyama. The young disciples of the Nine Peaks were very happy, feeling extremely honored. The masters of the peaks had high expectations for Jingzhou, but they were still surprised when they heard the news, thinking that Jingzhou was still young and couldn't possibly defeat Lo Huainan. On the top of the Shinma Peak, Gu Qing and Young Yuan blanched a plate of mulberry leaves to make a salad, washed some fruits, and opened a jar of medicinal wine. Those monkeys ran up from the bottom of the cliff after smelling the wine, chirping incessantly to prevent the banquet from being too quiet. "I'll go out of the mountain to pick up my master tomorrow." Young Yuan put down the wine cup, his happy mood replaced by worry. The news from Zhaoga City wasn't clear, so he didn't know how serious his master's injury was. Calculating the time, the wooden sword boat that would pick up Zhao Lei would arrive in Cloudy Town the next day. "I'll go with her, of course," said Gu Qing. Young Yuan said, "Shouldn't someone stay on the peak?" Gu Qing pointed to those monkeys and said, "Don't we have them?" Among the officials of Taichung Temple, Jingshang was the most low-key one. Even though his colleagues knew who his younger brother was and even congratulated him after the chess tournament of the plum meeting, he was still the same as before, doing his work honestly and behaving himself, not showing any arrogance because of it. With his style of doing things, he naturally wouldn't hold a banquet or call his friends. But that night, he still asked his wife to prepare a sumptuous dinner and opened a bottle of wine that had been hidden for 15 years. It didn't take long before he was drunk and his face was red. Father Jing didn't know what had happened, so he asked a few words of concern. Madame Jing said with a smile, "It's nothing serious." "I just heard that. Little uncle won first place in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting." When Jingshang heard this, he wanted to say that he couldn't just casually call him uncle, but he really couldn't suppress the feeling of honor in his heart. He drank another cup of wine happily, but he thought with slight regret, why didn't he let him place a bet this time? In the public house, not far from the Jing family, Duke Lu and the Crown Prince were drinking together. A bright pearl is a bright pearl. It doesn't matter if it's sandstorms or cold snow. The Crown Prince's eyes were full of admiration as he said, "If the successor is already like this, then what kind of person was the person who held the wooden token back then? Grandfather really has good taste." Duke Lu said, "Idiot, it's not that your grandfather had good foresight. Your grandfather was chosen. What we need to do is to prove that that person's foresight is correct." The crown prince thought what he said was reasonable, saying, "Father, I want to go to the Nishiyama house to see that painting of plum blossoms tomorrow." Those paintings of plum blossoms will be kept by various cultivation sections. The cultivation tournament wasn't over yet, and Jingjiu's painting of plum blossoms was still in the Nishiyama house. If he wanted to see it, he had to do it now. Duke Lu said, "That painting has been sent to the royal palace at dusk. The emperor wants to see it." Before Jingjiu's painting of plum blossoms was sent to the Net Perception Temple to be evaluated by the Zen master before it was sent to the royal palace. Surprisingly, there was still no news from the cultivation practitioners until the next morning. Even those cultivation practitioners who didn't like the style of the Aoyama sect had to admit that Jingjiu should have won first place in the cultivation tournament. Did something go wrong in the cultivation tournament? At the top of the Nishiyama house, the wooden fence was surrounded by clouds and mist, looking like a fairyland. The influential figures of the cultivation circle had gathered here again because of one matter. Accompanied by a pure and gentle aura, the elder of the Zhongzhou school, who rarely showed up, also came. He came from the Cloud Dream Mountain because today's event had something to do with the Zhongzhou school. In the middle of the pavilion, there was an object that looked like a sand table. The bottom of the table gave off the unique glow of a magic treasure. There was a slight mist on the top of the table, and the images inside were faintly discernible. This was the most precious treasure of the Ozawa sect, the 1,000-mile map. The 1,000-mile map could show images from very far away. Together with the cold signal bird of the Kunlun sect and the talisman magic treasure of the Faiyuan sect, they could get a simple picture of the situation ahead. Over the past few days, the strange cold mist had appeared much less frequently, and the images were much clearer. The positions of the young disciples participating in the cultivation tournament could be seen clearly. Most of the young disciples had entered the Black Mountain, getting closer and closer to the hinterland of the Snowy Kingdom and to the real danger. There were 8 or 9 faint spots of light in the mountains ahead. There were not many of them, and they were divided into 2 groups. They should be the group that Lo Huainan and Tong Lu were in. In a valley far behind them, there were many spots of light gathered together. There were so many people that the valley seemed to be somewhat brightly lit. In the beginning, they stopped for 2 days and then set off again. They met another group midway, and then they stopped and moved on, showing no signs of splitting up even now. The Duke of He said, "They should be very clear about the rules of the cultivation tournament. This is not right, but it doesn't look like they are planning to cheat." He looked at the sand table as he spoke, but all the sect masters and elders present knew who he was talking to. Nan Wang was expressionless, as if he hadn't heard anything. Indeed, according to the news from the front lines, this was all Jing Jiu's idea. After killing dozens of snow-foot monsters that night, he led the young disciples in traveling between the snowy plains and the cold mountains. By now, more than 30 people had gathered. It was obvious that he was doing this on purpose. The question was, what was he trying to do? Is he so proud because he won first place in the cultivation tournament that he wants to be the leader of the new generation? The sect master of Kunlun sneered and said, "Does he still have any respect for us teachers? Does he still have any respect for the rules? First place in the cultivation tournament is of course something to be proud of. Besides, he is the personal disciple of martial Uncle Jingyang. Few people in the world of cultivation are qualified to be his teacher." Nan Wang said with a cold expression. She didn't like Jing Jiu because he was too good-looking and too dazzling, unlike Jingyang, who was as gentle as jade and as elegant as a pine tree. But at this time, she had to speak up for him. The elder of Zhongzhou School spoke up, saying, "Shouldn't we not rush to make a judgment? Maybe they have encountered something." He had to say this, not because of Jing Jiu, but because Bai Zhao was also there. More importantly, according to the news from the front lines, Jing Jiu was able to persuade those young disciples to stop mostly because of Bai Zhao's support. Jing Jiu had never thought of winning first place in the cultivation tournament. There was a gap between his realm and Lo Huainan's, and he didn't know that he was so suitable for the snowy plains before he chased after the snow foot monsters that night. Of course, he wouldn't let Jingxiang bet. He had participated in the cultivation tournament for other reasons, and what he was doing now was one of them. What was he trying to do? Chapter 186. The cold wind was howling, and the temperature in the valley was extremely low. Even though these young disciples were cultivators, it was still difficult for them to endure the cold. They were all standing behind rocks or in caves. Their discussions were also cut off by the cold wind. Why we have to wait for another day? He won the first place in the cultivation tournament. We still have a long way to go. We have to hurry. You guys should be grateful. It's only been one day. We have already wasted 4 days on our way here to meet up with your teams. Damn it. Why we have to stop when he says so? Everyone knew this was Jingjiu's idea. If Jingjiu was not from Aoyama and had a high status, and had the support of Baizeo, the crowd would have already started a fight. Even the disciples of Aoyama felt frustrated, but they did not dare to say anything. What are you trying to do? Is it because you think something big is going to happen, so you want to gather more people? Baizeo looked at Jingjiu and asked softly. Something big must have happened in the snow country, and there might be great danger ahead. But Jingjiu did not want to unite all the forces that could be united to fight against the unknown danger. Let's wait for another half a day, he said to Baizeo. Baizeo had already guessed his intention through the journey in the past few days. Jingjiu knew the routes and speed of each team. His route arrangement could ensure that they would meet these teams in the shortest time possible. Baizeo had calculated that if they waited for another half a day in this valley, they would meet 2 more teams. Just like before, there was also one disciple of Aoyama in each of the 2 teams. The sun left the middle of the sky. The cold wind became stronger and the temperature dropped. The young disciples' discussions gradually quieted down. They began to meditate and regulate their breath to fight against the cold and recover from Zhenyuan. The atmosphere in the valley did not calm down because of the silence. Instead, it became more and more depressing and anxious. Even the cold wind could not disperse the atmosphere. An hour later, a team arrived at the valley and was asked to stay. When the setting sun was still a palm's length away from the mouth of the gorge, the last team arrived. At this time, there were a total of 10 teams in the canyon, with a total of 45 people. Baizeo glanced at Jingjiu. If everyone is here, then speak. Just based on your seniority, battle achievements, reputation, and my reputation, it's impossible for them to stay. Sure enough, the long wait had exhausted the patience of these young people, and the atmosphere in the canyon became a little restless. A disciple from an unknown sect shouted, "The sun is about to set. Why aren't you leaving?" Jingjiu did not look at the dozens of young faces that were filled with questions or anger. He said to Baizeo, "Send a message to the Nishiyama house. I demand to stop the cultivation tournament and recall all the disciples immediately." At the highest point of the Nishiyama house, clouds and mist were still lingering, but the whole peak seemed to be on fire as dusk was approaching. The heads of various sects were still discussing why Jingjiu wanted to stop with the dozens of young disciples, and whether they should send a message or punish them, when they suddenly received a message from the snowland. The cultivation tournament had encountered an unprecedented challenge. It was not because the disciples participating in the cultivation tournament had encountered a sudden change of heaven and earth, but because such a thing had never happened before. No one had even thought about it. Jingjiu demands to stop the cultivation tournament immediately and recall all the young disciples. Duke V's face was a bit pale. The sect leader of Kunlun's face was as cold as frost, and he scolded angrily. Is this guy crazy? If it were any other time, Nin Wang would definitely retort. But at this time, she was a bit shocked by Jingjiu's request, so she did not say anything. The heads of various sects looked at each other, speechless, and they all thought it was ridiculous. Even if Jingjiu was a genius in swordsmanship cultivated by the sword sect of Aoyama, and even if he was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang, he was only a young disciple participating in the cultivation tournament. What qualifications did he have, and where did he get the courage to make such an absurd request? The elder of Zhongzhou school thought it was a bit weird, and he glanced at Nan Wang and asked, why did he make such a request? Duke of Yi raised his eyebrows slightly and said, he said he didn't feel well. The elder of Zhongzhou school looked a bit surprised and asked, that's all? Duke of Yi sighed and said, yes, there is no other reason. The sect leader of Kunlun sneered. He wants to stop the cultivation tournament because he doesn't feel well? Who does he think he is? The monster invasion 200 years ago was the only time the cultivation tournament had ended prematurely, and it was confirmed that there would be no monster invasion this year. The cultivation tournament was halfway through, and the participating disciples went deep into the snowland. Chaotic winds were everywhere in the sky. If the cultivation tournament was to be stopped and the participants were brought back immediately, the sect guarding celestial treasures of various sects would have to be used. The point was, even if it could be done, why would the cultivation world make such a big move just because of Jing Jio's words? Was it because of the cold fog that occasionally appeared these days? Or was it because of the iron thread bug that had never appeared again? Even if it was, as Baizeo had predicted, that the Snowy Kingdom was really in trouble and the snow monsters hiding deep under the snowland had retreated, what did it have to do with the cultivation tournament? No matter why he went crazy, he must be punished for violating the rules so blatantly. The sect leader of Kunlun said coldly, I demand that Jing Jio be disqualified from the tournament. The expression on Nan Wang's face became even more ghastly. The cultivation tournament would not be stopped just because of Jing Jio's words. Just as the sect leader of Kunlun had said, he did not have the status or the qualification. The current situation had become what kind of punishment should be given to Jing Jio for his reckless behavior. If it had been an ordinary disciple of another sect who had made such a request, he would have been disqualified and punished severely afterward. The problem was that Jing Jio was the youngest uncle of Aoyama. His seniority was there, and he should have been the champion of this year's cultivation tournament. More importantly, everybody was aware of the young Zen master's concern for him. The sect leaders and elders of various sects in the Nishiyama house all went to the Net Perception Temple. Only Zen Master could decide what kind of punishment should be given to Jingjio. There were seats in a small courtyard deep in the Net Perception Temple, and there was tea on the table. But no one took a seat. They looked at the window, waiting for Zen Master to speak. After an unknown amount of time, a voice came from the window. Did Jingjio restrict the actions of the participants? Or did he do anything? If he didn't do anything, then what reason should we use to punish him? Hearing this, the sect leader of Kunlun's expression became somewhat ugly. He said, are we just going to let him talk nonsense like this? Since we know it's nonsense, then what's the point of paying attention to it? After saying this, there was no more sound from behind the window. Duke of He understood what Zen Master meant. With a bitter laugh, he said to the crowd, forget it. Let's just treat it as the nonsense of the youngsters. In any case, he can't stop the cultivation tournament. Which young disciple will listen to him? Just as Duke of Yi had said, no one would listen to Jingjio. After understanding Jingjio's meaning, the cold valley instantly became noisy. Dozens of pairs of eyes fell on Jingjio. They were shocked and complicated. In their eyes, Jingjio, who had won the champion of the cultivation tournament, was a genius swordsman worthy of respect. But now, when they looked at Jingjio, it was as if they were looking at a madman. Why did you stop the cultivation tournament in advance? A staid monk from the Baodong Zen temple asked. Jingjio said, I have a bad feeling. There seems to be danger ahead. Hearing this, the crowd was even more in an uproar. An angry voice rang out. Chapter 187. It was a disciple of the Kunlun sect who spoke. In the first half of the cultivation tournament, his performance was quite good. However, after running into this group of people the day before yesterday, he was delayed for 2 days. Now, it seemed that it would be very difficult for him to enter the top ranks. Naturally, he was angry. What he said was what many people were thinking, but no one said it out loud like he did. 9 disciples of Aoyama, including Yao Song's Han, looked at this person. Their eyes were extremely sharp, like real swords. This disciple of Kunlun suddenly remembered the mantra of the sword sect of Aoyama, and his body suddenly became cold. He even felt that these eyes were even colder than the wind in the valley, so he shut his mouth subconsciously. Are you trying to bully others? Two disciples of the Western Sea Sword School walked out of the crowd and said, Is this fellow from Kunlun wrong? Yao Songzhan squinted slightly, his clothes fluttering slightly, and his sword was about to be released. The other disciples of Aoyama were also ready to draw their swords. This was not a matter of bullying others, nor was it a time to argue. Although they did not agree with Jing Jio's opinion, how could they tolerate the disciples of other sects insulting their teachers? At this moment, Bai Zhao spoke. She looked at Jing Jio and said, The Nishiyama house replied and rejected your request. They sounded very strict, and there may be problems after this. To put it lightly, Jing Jio's behavior was reckless. To put it more seriously, he was deliberately sabotaging the grand meeting of the Orthodox Cultivation Circle that was held once every few years. Even if he won first place in the cultivation tournament, he would still be severely punished afterward. Bai Zhao really did not expect that Jing Jio wanted to leave the snowland with so many people. Facing unknown dangers, he did not face them together, but ran away. This was the complete opposite of the big brother's behavior. Logically speaking, Bai Zhao should look down on such behavior, but she always felt that Jing Jio was not such a person, so she only felt puzzled and then at a loss. Jing Jio said, I know they won't agree because I don't have any evidence. I only have a feeling, so I'm just asking. The disciple of the Western Sea Sword School said in a deep voice, Do we still have to listen to this crazy talk? After saying this, he put away his sword pouch and led his fellow disciples into the canyon. Many young disciples also stood up. Thinking about how they had been delayed for such a long time, many of them couldn't help but glance at Jing Jio as they left. Even if I don't dare to scold you, I can at least look at you, right? Jing Jio acted as if he could not sense the meaning behind their gazes and said, Aoyama disciples, listen up. Hearing this, the young cultivators in the canyon were slightly shocked, thinking that the Nishiyama house did not agree with him. But he still dared to forcibly stop them. The Aoyama disciples were also a little surprised, but they still stepped out of the line and stood in front of him. Jing Jio did not pay attention to the other young cultivators at all. He looked at them and said, You stay here and be ready to leave at any time. Seeing this, Bai Zhao had mixed feelings, thinking that no wonder he did not care about the Nishiyama house's reply. It turned out that he only wanted to bring the disciples of the Aoyama sect back. From the beginning until now, the route that Jing Jio had planned was to gather the 10 groups together, because there were disciples of Aoyama in these groups. He had not thought about anything else. The Aoyama disciples were a little surprised and confused, thinking that the masters had already rejected him, so why did he still want to leave? The Kunlun disciple had already come back to his senses. Thinking of his previous cowardice, he was a little embarrassed and said sarcastically, So the disciples of Aoyama are also afraid of death? The disciples of Aoyama looked at this person with even colder eyes. The Kunlun disciple was scared, but looking at the other cultivators around him, he summoned up his courage and said, What? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to let others talk about it? The disciples of Aoyama looked terrible, and their feelings were extremely complicated. If they really stayed and left later, what would that mean? Since when did the disciples of Aoyama become the weaklings who avoided fighting and retreated? The disciple of Liang Wang, Peak, named Lei Ilkyung, was a little annoyed. He looked at Jing Jio and said, Uncle, Jing Jio, do you think that the front is very dangerous? Jing Jio said, That's right. It is not a danger that you young disciples can bear. The disciples of Liangwang Peak had a very bad impression of Jing Jio. The fact that Jing Jio had won the first place in the cultivation tournament had changed Lei Ilkyung's opinion, but he still couldn't help but feel strongly against Jing Jio's words. Cultivators either die of old age or die in the north. These are the two most common ways of returning home in the past 10,000 years. Lei Ilkyung said in a deep voice, I joined Liangwang Peak, so I chose the latter. Why should I be afraid of danger? Uncle, please grant my wish. That's right. This has always been a trial. Bai Zhao looked at Jingjiao and said, the test of life and death is the true meaning of the cultivation tournament. Only in this way can the Tao heart be truly tranquil. Jingjiao said, in my opinion, the cultivation tournament has always been meaningless. Hearing this, the valley that was already a little chaotic suddenly became dead silent. Bai Zhao couldn't believe what he had heard. Yin Qingma and the other 5 young cultivation practitioners had been with Jingjiao since the beginning, so they trusted him the most. Even though Jingjiao had caused public anger, they still stood behind Jingjiao and Bai Zhao in silence. But when they heard what Jingjiao had said, their expressions became uneasy. What Jingjiao said directly denied the intention of those legendary cultivation practitioners who had founded the Plum Meeting. The purpose of cultivation is longevity. Life and death are the most important things, and they should be respected. It is disrespectful to use them as a test. Jingjiao continued, and the tranquility of the Tao heart depends on self-reflection and has nothing to do with external things. That disciple of Kunlun thought Jingjiao was a madman who couldn't be communicated with. Many young cultivation practitioners shook their heads speechlessly and were about to leave. Lei Il-kyung couldn't control his emotion any longer and said to Jingjiao, Senior Master, please forgive me for not being able to obey your order. Having said that, he turned around and walked toward the inside of the valley. The rest of the disciples of Aoyama looked at Jingjiao hesitantly, not knowing what to do. Even the disciples of Aoyama had different opinions. What would Jingjiao do? Bai Zhao glanced at Jingjiao worriedly. Looking at the back of Lei Il-kyung, Jingjiao raised his right hand after a moment of silence. The iron sword broke through the cloth and turned into a black light, striking down at Lei Il-kyung. A burst of surprised screams broke out in the valley. Sensing the formidable sword was behind him, Lei Il-kyung called out his flying sword reflexively to counter it. He was indeed an outstanding disciple of Liangwang Peak. Both his reaction speed and the speed of his sword drawing were very timely. Dang! 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 The 2 sword lights traveled at a high speed in front of the cliff wall, colliding with each other constantly. The air waves generated by the collision brought up countless snowflakes, and the powerful sword wills penetrated the cliff wall, causing the mountain rocks to fall down with rustling sounds. In an instant, the result of the sword fight had been determined. There was a muffled boom. Lei Il-kyung hit the cliff wall heavily and then slid down to the ground. The flying sword returned to his side, hovering quietly in the air, making a buzzing sound. A trickle of blood seeped out from the corner of Lei Il-kyung's mouth, and his eyes were blank. It was not until now that he realized what had happened. If he had known it was Jingjiao's sword, he wouldn't have dared to draw his sword back. The disciples of Aoyama were very surprised. They hurried to the edge of the cliff and helped Lei Il-kyung up. After confirming that he was not seriously injured, they were relieved. A young disciple from Liangwang Peak couldn't suppress his anger. He looked at Jingjiao and said, Senior Master, why did you do this? The rest of the disciples of Aoyama were also angry. Obviously, Jingjiao's intention was to stop Lei Il-kyung from leaving, and for this reason, he even drew his sword against Lei Il-kyung. Jingjiao looked at the disciples of Aoyama and said, You too. There is no reason not to obey, because I don't forgive. If I don't forgive, you can't leave. Jingjiao's way of doing things was very tough, and it could be said that he was completely unreasonable. The disciples of Aoyama were certainly not convinced. They had cultivated diligently for many years, and it wasn't easy for them to qualify for the sword trial and participate in the cultivation tournament on behalf of Green Mountain. However, they were forced to leave before they could show their talents. Who would be willing to accept that? And this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the reputation of the Aoyama sect would not be tarnished because of them. If they really listened to Jingjiao and withdrew from the cultivation tournament today, The Aoyama sect would become a laughingstock in the world of cultivation. The problem was, what could they do even if they were not convinced? Jingjiu was young, and he had been in a mountain gate for a shorter time than them, but he was still the senior master of Shinma Peak. Would they dare to draw their swords against him? Thinking of this possibility, the hands of the disciples of Aoyama trembled. Yao Song's Han stared at them and shouted in a deep voice, "Do you dare to offend your superiors? Do you want to go to Shangda Peak and be pierced by thousands of swords?" The disciples of Aoyama lowered their heads and were speechless. Of course, they did not dare to draw their sword against Jingjiu, but they felt wronged and disappointed. I didn't expect to see a good show of the disciples of Aoyama's sword sect killing each other. The disciple of the Western Sea Sword School mocked, "Oh no, I was wrong. It should be the senior master who is afraid of death teaching the junior nephews who are ashamed." Jingjiu glanced at the person. Bai Zhao knew that the situation was not good, and he knew that he could not stop it in time, so he took out his magic treasure without hesitation. His sleeves billowed in the cold wind, and a magic treasure appeared in front of the cliff. It was about the size of a wine cup, and its shape was similar to the heart-cleansing bell of the Platonist sect. The magic treasure grew with the wind, and in an instant, it turned into a small bell. It was dark green in color, as if it was made of bronze, but there were countless streaks of dark light flowing on its surface, giving it an indescribable sense of beauty and pressure. The flowing light bell. Chapter 188. The flowing light bell was a famous magic treasure of the Zhongzhou school, and it could be considered the most powerful weapon in the fights below the Yuanying state. These magic treasures were inherited from the distant ancient times, and they were a natural pair called the North Time Bell or the Nanping Bell. The current sect master and his wife of the Zhongzhou school had defeated many geniuses of the same generation and killed many demons of the underworld and monsters of the Snowy Kingdom with this pair of bells when they were young. Over the years, the North Time Bell had been in the hands of Lo Huainan, displaying its brilliance and reputation. It wasn't until now that the crowd realized that the Nanping Bell was in the hands of Bai Zhao. Bai Zhao was the only daughter of the sect master and his wife of the Zhongzhou school, so she was qualified to hold the Nanping Bell. Did this mean that the sect master and his wife of the Zhongzhou school had reached an agreement to choose Lo Huainan instead of Tong Yin as Bai Zhao's cultivation partner? If this was true, it would be the most anticipated event in the entire cultivation circle of Chaotian. But it was something to be considered later. The question was, why did Bai Zhao suddenly employ the flowing light bell? It took the young cultivation practitioners only a short time to come up with this idea. The Nanping Bell thundered toward the disciple of the Western Sea Sword School. Whoosh! A violent wind sprang up, and an indescribable air wave, an invisible sound wave, spread out in all directions of the valley. The snowflakes danced in the air, and the cliff walls broke into pieces. The energy of heaven and earth had changed accordingly. The disciple of the Western Sea Sword School was a personal disciple of the sect, so he called out his life sword at the most critical moment to block the attack. But his flying sword couldn't block a magic treasure of such a high state. With a sharp sound, the flying sword flew up diagonally and pierced into the hard cliff wall. It penetrated more than 2 feet into the cliff wall, leaving only the hilt of the sword exposed. The disciple of the Western Sea Sword School was knocked back 100 feet and landed on the snowy ground. He spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, his face extremely pale. After being helped up by his fellow disciples, he didn't have the time to check on his injuries or wipe off the blood. His face was full of shock as he looked at the other side and shouted, "Junior Sister Bai, what do you mean by this?" The fellow disciple reminded him in a low voice. He looked at where he had been, and only then did he understand what had happened. His face turned even paler. A black flying sword hovered there. If he hadn't forcefully drawn his sword and been sent flying, he would have been silently struck by that black sword. In other words, without Bai Zhao, he would have been dead by now. That black sword was a little wide and didn't look special, but didn't have any aura fluctuations, just like a real ghost. The Western Sea Sword School disciple still had lingering fear and could no longer speak. The other young cultivators also felt a chill when they saw the black flying sword. Everyone knew that Jing Jiu had taken first place in the law examination, but no one would compare him to people like Lo Huainan and Tong Lu. He was only at the initial stage of the undefeated. How strong could he be? Only now did everyone know how terrifying his sword was. Jing Jiu turned his head and glanced at Bai Zhao. In Aoyama, he had heard Gu Qing say that in recent years, the relationship between Zhongzhou School and Western Sea Sword School had gradually improved, and there were even signs of an alliance. The Zhongzhou School disciples could be seen at the Four Seas banquet outside Haizhou City, which was proof of this. That was probably why Bai Zhao made a move. She was smart. She probably thought that this Nanping Bell not only saved the life of the Western Sea Sword School disciple, but also helped him vent his anger. But how could you judge that I would be satisfied? Jing Jiu didn't speak, and there was not much emotion in his eyes. But Bai Zhao accurately understood his meaning. The cold wind ruffled the white gauze. She said this in a very low voice that only Jing Jiu could hear. Give me some face. Jing Jiu didn't say anything and called back the black sword. The Western Sea Sword School disciple glanced at him with hatred, but he didn't dare to provoke him again. He took out his flying sword from a cliff. Realm strength couldn't convince the crowd, not to mention that this was a cultivation tournament, not a place for life and death. Many voices sounded. Even if you get first in the cultivation tournament, no one will be convinced by you, because you are a coward and unreasonable. Based on these 2 points, you will never become Lo Huainan. That's right. Do you think you can shut all of our mouths? Unless you kill us all. What qualifications do you have to inherit the legacy of the immortal Jing Yang? Jing Jiu acted as if he didn't hear these voices and asked, Did anyone from the Platonist sect come? A young girl looked at her fellow Taoists around her and timidly raised her hand. Then, another 2 disciples of the Platonist sect raised their hands. The disciples of the Platonist sect had always played an important role in the cultivation tournament, so there were always a lot of participants. Jing Jiu then asked, What about Ozawa? Someone raised his hand. There were 2 cultivators from Ozawa present. Jing Jiu said, We are not from the same sect, so we shouldn't force you to go with us. But the relationship between our 3 sects is too close. If I don't take you with me, the elders of your sects will say that I didn't help you. That would be too troublesome. The disciples of the Platonist sect and Ozawa were stunned for a while before they understood what he meant, and they were at a loss. Some disciples of other sects looked at the scene with sympathy and shouted, Why? They are not from the Aoyama sect. Jing Jiu ignored this person and said to the disciples of the Platonist sect and Ozawa, or fight with me. The disciples of the Platonist sect and Ozawa eyed each other, and they could see the helplessness in each other's eyes. Jing Jiu looked at the crowd again, making sure that there were no monks of the Guocheng Temple or disciples of small sects affiliated with the Aoyama sect. Finally, his gaze fell on a young girl. The clothes of the young girl looked familiar to him, and he must have seen them many times many years ago. It's true that Shuei Nunnery and Aoyama have a good relationship, but I won't listen to you. If you want to fight, let's fight. Even if you can't defeat me, you can't possibly kill me. The young girl said this, the disdain in her eyes evident. Jing Jiu thought that Shuei Nunnery's young sister used to be so gentle and lovely, and it wasn't until Lien Sanyue appeared that she developed a temperament that disliked everything in the world. Jing Jiu didn't say anything, but said to the crowd in the valley, The rest of you can stay if you want to, or leave if you want to. The 2 disciples of the Western Sea Sword School and the disciple of the Kunlun left first, followed by many young cultivation practitioners. Some of them were annoyed that they had been delayed for so long because of such an absurd matter, which meant that they would have to kill fewer monsters of the Snowy Kingdom, and their results in the cultivation tournament would be much worse than before. They couldn't help but curse a few times, and some of them even spat in the direction of Jing Jiu. The disciples of the Zhongzhou school also left with their respective groups after consulting with Bai Zhao. There were only the disciples of Aoyama left in the valley. The 6 people who had followed Jingjiu and Bai Zhao since the beginning, and the 5 young disciples of the Platonist sect and the Ozawa sect. Jingjiu didn't say anything more and started to recuperate. In fact, some young disciples who had participated in the cultivation tournament hadn't left yet on the mountain paths around the valley. For example, the group of the 2 disciples of the Western Sea Sword School and the disciple of the Kunlun who had left first. Someone asked confusedly, "Why don't we leave?" A disciple of the Western Sea Sword School said in a low voice, "We have been delayed for so long, and it will be night soon. Why don't we camp here?" The disciple of the Western Sea Sword School who had been injured by the flowing light bell coughed twice, looked down at the valley, and said bitterly, "That's right. We can watch the fun." The other young cultivation practitioners were confused, wondering what fun was there to watch. The disciple of the Western Sea Sword School coughed twice again and said sarcastically, "They will be blown to death by the chaotic wind, and the Aoyama sect won't come to pick them up. I like to see how they are going to leave. Are they going to walk back like stray dogs?" Time passed, and the twilight was getting darker. The young disciples at the bottom of the valley could feel the gazes from the mountains and fields. The disciple of Liangwang Peak, named Lei Ilkyung, couldn't stand it anymore. He walked up to Jingjiu and almost begged, "If you stop the cultivation tournament halfway, you will be punished by the school. Even if you're the senior master, you can't ignore the school rules, can you?" Jingjiu said, "I don't remember there is such a rule in the school rules." Lei Ilkyung said angrily, "If you want to go back, then just go. With your speed, it will be hard for you to walk out of this snowland before the accident happens." Jingjiu thought to himself, but he didn't bother to explain, so he said directly, "Wait." Lei Ilkyung waved his hand weakly and didn't want to say anything more. The other young people also didn't want to say anything more. They had been waiting all along. Now, they understood that he had been waiting for the past few days to gather the 10 disciples of the Aoyama sect to participate in the cultivation tournament. So what were they waiting for now? All of a sudden, a huge shadow appeared in the valley. The young disciples, who had felt uneasy because of Jingjiu's words, suddenly became nervous. They looked up at the sky and found that the sunlight behind the clouds had disappeared. It seemed that the night had come early. Could it be that the strange cold fog had appeared again? The disciples of Aoyama reacted the fastest. Before Jingjiu gave the order, 9 flying swords whizzed out and formed a sword formation, guarding the 4 sides. Some people looked at Bai Zhao. Bai Zhao looked at the sky, his expression a bit strange. The thin clouds suddenly broke. A huge flying boat appeared in the sight of the crowd, along with countless wisps of clouds and turbulence. The huge boat landed slowly on the ground, bringing with it an unimaginable pressure. Chapter 189. The huge boat was shaped like a sword and as big as a mountain, emitting an ear-piercing whistling sound as it pressed down on the air. The damage caused by the chaotic wind could be seen clearly on the sideboards of the flying boat. Fortunately, the damage wasn't too severe. A sword boat? The disciples of Aoyama were shocked speechless. So were the young disciples of other sections. The sudden appearance of the sword boat meant that the Aoyama sect had already learned of Jingjiu's idea and expressed its support. Lei Ilkyung was bewildered. He had just said that he would be punished by the sect if he withdrew from the cultivation tournament halfway, and then he saw this scene. Those young cultivation practitioners who hadn't left yet wondered in bewilderment what was going on. Looking at Jingjiu's wrist, Bai Zhao thought that it was Jingjiu who sent the letter to Aoyama when the sword bracelet disappeared. This flying sword could leave its master and travel more than 50,000 miles by itself, so it was definitely an extraordinary sword. Since the sword sect of Aoyama listened to his idea, Jingjiu must be an extraordinary disciple. It was quiet in the small courtyard of the Net Perception Temple. The sect masters and elders of various sects were shocked, not knowing what to say. The sect master of Kunlun was extremely angry, demanding, "What is going on? Why did the sword boat of the Aoyama sect appear in the snowland?" Duke of he didn't say anything, frowning, wondering if something would happen in the cultivation tournament this year. Why did the Aoyama sect make such a judgment? Why didn't they inform the sects in advance? He turned to Nan Wang and asked, "What is the reason for your sect's action?" Nan Wang replied nonchalantly, "I'm in Zhaoga City. How can I know what is going on in the mountains?" The sword boat was an important treasure of Aoyama and was managed by Shuriwa Peak. The sword boat that appeared in the snowland was the ocean boat of the highest spiritual state. Only the sect master of Aoyama, Yuan Qijing, and the peak master of Shuriwa had the right to use it. The chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau came over hurriedly and delivered a sword letter. Duke of E took the sword letter and sensed it for a moment. Then his expression turned serious. He looked at the crowd and said, "Aoyama said that they were not sure if there would be any problems at the moment. But since Jing Jiao had won first place in the law tournament, there was no point in continuing the law tournament. To be on the safe side, they strongly suggested that all sects take back their disciples." What he didn't finish was that the Aoyama sect had stated clearly in the sword letter that they didn't care if the host of the plum meeting didn't listen to them. "But if something were to happen in the future, don't blame Aoyama for not warning me." One of the sect masters asked with concern, "Did the Aoyama sect say what exactly happened?" Duke of E snapped, "I've already said that they're not sure if there's a problem. They just said that it doesn't feel right." Hearing the words, "it doesn't feel right," the sect leader and elders present felt a headache. Everything that had happened in the cultivation tournament had started from these four inexplicable words. It's different whether it's Jing Jiao's feeling or the sect master's feeling. The sect master thought it was ridiculous, letting out a bitter smile. The elder of Zhongzhou school asked, "How many disciples did the sword boat take back?" 30, replied Duke of He. The sect masters and elders were startled. What they didn't know was that Jing Jiao had also taken away the disciples of Ozawa and Platana sect in addition to the 10 disciples of Aoyama, and some other young cultivation practitioners were willing to follow him. The arrival of the sword boat made some young cultivation practitioners who had no intention of leaving change their minds. The influence of the Aoyama sect in the cultivation world was simply too great. The problem was that there were 150 young disciples participating in the cultivation tournament, and 1/5 of them were gone. What should they do next? The appearance of the sword boat in Aoyama would cause many people to waver in their attitude. Would this year's cultivation tournament end so hastily? The sect master of the Kunlun sect looked at Nan Wang and said angrily, "What does the Aoyama sect mean? You don't care about such an absurd disciple, and you even support him." Nan Wang said expressionlessly, "The Aoyama sect has always valued talents, and we don't stick to one pattern. The masters are open-minded and willing to accept the opinions of young people. Is there a problem?" She didn't like Jing Jiao at first, but now her opinion of him had changed a lot. The first place in the cultivation tournament was not a big deal, as the Aoyama sect had won it many times. But Jing Jiao was the first person to end the cultivation tournament in advance. Many sect masters and elders had thought of this problem. A young disciple participating in the cultivation tournament ended right away. What did it mean? Even the abbot of the Baotong Zen temple, who had the best temper, was a bit angry, saying, "When Jing Jiao comes back, I'll have to talk to him face to face." Duke of E said he didn't come back. Jing Jiao didn't come back with the sword boat. What did that mean? The small courtyard was very quiet. Behind the window, it was even more quiet. Kneeling on the bed, the young Zen master tried to get his eyes closer to the pile of messy wooden sticks. Yes, he couldn't see clearly at the moment. The news from the small town was that there would be no monster tide this year, which was the same as Monk Shurhai's judgment. That person also went to the small town, but he also couldn't see anything. Why did the Aoyama sect say that something was wrong when both he and that person couldn't see anything? The sword sect of Aoyama was certainly powerful, but how could it compare to Shuiyu Nunnery and the Guocheng Temple when it came to perception? If Jing Jiao wasn't the successor of Jingyang, he would certainly ignore this matter. But now he needed to think about it more clearly. After an unknown amount of time, the sound of the night watch coming into his ears woke Zen Master up. It was already late at night outside the window, His clear and even slightly childish eyes revealed a slightly perplexed expression. He could hear that the sound of the night watch came from the distant royal palace, dozens of miles away, but he still couldn't calculate this matter clearly. Let the sex prepare first, he thought to himself. The sword boat left, but the big hole tore in the clouds couldn't be filled in a short time. The last rays of the setting sun shone on the snowy mountain and refracted into the valley. Everywhere was a pleasant golden color. The young cultivation practitioners who participated in the cultivation tournament had all left, whether they were willing or not. Very few people could be seen around the valley. Why didn't you leave? Jingjio looked at Baizeo and asked. Whether he left the snowland on the sword boat, or left the valley for the depths of the snowland, or continued to participate in the cultivation tournament, it was all a matter of leaving. Baizeo asked back, "Why didn't you leave?" Jingjio said, "I want to go and have a look." After stepping into the snowland, the further north he went, the worse he felt. After encountering that strange cold fog that night, this feeling became even stronger. If the danger in the depths of the snowland was a trap set by his big brother, then according to his previous practice, he would leave after sending off the disciples of Aoyama. This was not avoiding the battle, but the way of the host and the guest. He had always followed this principle in the battles that had lasted for hundreds of years, so he had never lost. Yet, it seemed that he had never won in the end. That was why he agreed to help Zhao Liu. If this was a trap, then he would try to break through it. When would he enter the trap? He still had to wait. This time he was not waiting for someone or a boat, but for something. The night passed uneventfully. The morning sun rose again, and Baizeo was still there. "If you don't leave now, it will be too late," said Jingjio. Baizeo said softly, "Don't worry about me. I can leave whenever I want to." The Jing dynasty occupied 1/3 of Chaotian. To the north was the extremely cold snowland. There was a huge mountain range in the deep end of the snowland, and the snowy kingdom was on the other side of the mountain range. There was a small town in the northernmost part of the human territory. The town was only a few miles long and wide, and its walls were made of mud bricks. It was white most of the time because of the wind and snow, so it was called White Town. It was very cold in White Town. Even the most cold-resistant pine and cypress couldn't grow here, let alone grains and vegetables. Yet, some residents lived in the town. They knelt on the street in ragged fur clothing, kowtowing and praying piously to the high ground. On the road leading to White Town in the south, the believers were also kowtowing and praying, the carriages behind them carrying grains, vegetables, and meat. White Town was built against a mountain. The cliffs were made of red rocks, which looked as eye-catching as blood against the white snow. There was an inconspicuous temple in front of the mountain, with a golden Buddha statue in it. The golden Buddha statue was 100 feet tall and fat, with his eyes closed, curling up the corners of his mouth with a smile, looking like a mountain. An iron broadsword was placed in front of the Buddha statue. The iron broadsword was about 30 feet long, like a house beam. The ground on which the broadsword was placed had sunk half a foot. It was evident how heavy the broadsword was. It was hard to say who in the world could lift such a broadsword. A young woman walked to the front of the temple and lifted her head to look at the couplets on both sides. Save the suffering, save the people, and pray to the Buddha, the Tao, and oneself. The content of this couplet looked ordinary, but had a profound meaning if one were to read it carefully. For instance, this young woman had an indescribable temperament despite her ordinary appearance. It seemed that heaven and earth didn't dare look at her when she didn't like it. Having read the couplet, the young woman tucked her hair behind her ears, walked into the temple, and stood in front of the Buddha statue. A deep and resonant voice rang out, but it was full of regret, sounding like the famous broken bell in the Guocheng Temple. Chapter 190. The young girl was Shui Yu Nunnery's Guidong. It was said that she was the personal disciple of Lien Sanwei. For some reason, she didn't participate in the cultivation tournament of the Plum meeting this year, but came to White Town to see the Buddha. It was unknown why the voice would say such a thing. "So it's you? What is the original meaning of this?" Could it be that she wasn't herself? Guodong said nonchalantly, I didn't expect you to recognize me. The man said, maybe it's because I've been watching you from behind for many years. I watched from behind for many years because I didn't have the courage nor the qualifications to stand in front of you. But your back has already been imprinted in the deepest part of my soul. So no matter how your appearance changes, how could I not recognize you? I know these two sentences are sour, but after thinking about it, I didn't delete them. Because he's this kind of person, standing in front of the Buddha statue, Guodong fell silent for a long time. After an unknown period of time, the voice resounded once more, and it was filled with sorrow and sorrow. I didn't expect you to choose this path in the end. Is it worth it to make such a huge sacrifice to catch up to him? What about you? Is it worth guarding this place for hundreds of years? As long as I do what I want to do, it doesn't matter if it's worth it or not. Me too. The only difference is that until the day you die, you will not be able to prove your success, but I have already proven my failure. So you came to the human world for a walk. Back then, he often said that one must look at the sun after coming to the human world. I don't have much time left, so I also want to look at it. Haizi's poem. Oh, that's why I remember you didn't know how to play the zither. Why did you participate in the plum meeting? I think even the Golden Zen master wouldn't dare say anything bad about you. No, I didn't attend the plum meeting. No, you did. If you hadn't lent me a hand at the plum meeting that year, I wouldn't have been able to kill that snow worm of the king state with my cultivation state at that time. Guodong wasn't used to being mentioned by Jingjiu in such a grateful tone. She turned around and left the Buddha statue. She came to the doorsill and looked at the snowland. Back then, you didn't manage to predict that insect. Could you have made a mistake this time? Why do you care about such trivial matters? The law tournament was the stage for the geniuses of the younger generation, and it was, of course, a major event for the cultivation world. Yet, that person was fully aware that these were trivial matters for Guodong. Jingyang's disciple is inside. Although I don't like him, I don't want him to die. Why don't you like him? Too beautiful. Guodong walked back to the front of the Buddha statue and took out a futon from under the table. She sat on it cross-legged and started resting with her eyes closed. She seemed to be very familiar with the temple, having been here many times before. She said nothing more. The temple was very quiet. Night fell. A sigh was heard. He was filled with gratification. It was still sad. Dawn came. Guodong opened her eyes and walked to the front of the doorsill again. She looked at the deep part of the snowland with a slightly grave expression, as she sensed that something was about to happen. That deep and broken voice rang out behind her. She's never been like this. Shueyu nunneries, Heaven's Will Connection, and Guoqing temples, Two Minds Connection, are the world's most powerful means of divining heaven's secrets. Yet Guodong was fully aware that nobody in this world had a better understanding of the being in the deep part of the snowland than the person behind her. What on earth has happened? I don't know. I sensed irritation, anger, pain, and a bit nervousness in her awareness. I don't understand why such a great being would feel nervous. The early morning arrived, and another night had come to an end. Jingjiu opened his eyes and rode the iron sword to the highest point of the peak, looking at the distance. The snowy kingdom was on the other side of the mountains. Suddenly, his Tao heart was moved slightly. Looking at the distance, so far that he couldn't even see it, he felt a bit nervous, but he didn't know the source of it. As far as he was concerned, it was rare for him to feel nervous. As the sound of something breaking through the air rang out, Bai Zhao appeared by his side. The Nanping bell exuded a faint energy, blocking the cold intent. What's wrong? In her eyes, the cold mountains were the same as the day before. Jingjiu's reply was simple and concise. Something has happened. No sooner had he finished speaking than a violent wind rose up. The cold air traveled through the fields and mountains at an unimaginable speed, making countless ear-piercing whistling sounds. The ice and snow that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years around the peak were blown away by the strong wind, revealing the black rocks. The temperature in the air suddenly dropped. In such a severe cold, an ordinary person would be frozen and die in an instant. Even if a cultivator operated the Zhenyuan, he wouldn't be able to hold on for too long. Bai Zhao felt that the cold intent had entered the barrier of the Nanping Bell, so he didn't dare to be careless. He took out a cloak made of fiery golden sparrow and put it on. Feeling the natural warmth in it, he looked a little better. Jing Jiao glanced at her, making sure that there should be no problem, and then he didn't pay any more attention to her. Bai Zhao looked at the thin, white clothes on him and couldn't help but feel puzzled, wondering if the cultivation method of the Aoyama sect was so magical. The ice and snow on the peak continued to fall, and suddenly there was a vibration from the depths. Bai Zhao looked down and saw a scene that was hard to forget. A snow worm was poking its head out from between the cliffs. The skin of the snow worm was translucent, and it wouldn't change after it grew up. However, it was extremely tough, and even the flying sword of a cultivator couldn't cut it. The body of this snow worm was so thick that it could fit into a small house. As it crawled, the sunlight fell on its translucent skin, and the things inside could be vaguely seen. There were stones, branches, and some broken limbs of snow-foot monsters. There were also some white bones of unknown animals. As the most famous monster in the snowy country, the snow worm was extremely fast in the holes corroded by its own juices, but it moved relatively slowly in other places. However, it was extremely dangerous, especially its appearance and way of eating, which could easily make people feel disgusted. Bai Zhao felt very disgusted at this moment, but he didn't dare to make any sound. The snow worm crawled out of the cliff, but it couldn't find a foothold. It swayed around in the cold wind, looking like a maggot growing on rotten meat, but many times larger. Bai Zhao frowned slightly. Suddenly, the body of the snow worm stopped in the cold wind. She felt a consciousness fall on her, and she knew that the snow worm had discovered her existence. Zhen Yuan silently channeled her power, ready to fight the enemy with the Nanping clock. For some reason, the snow worm ignored her and continued to stretch its body in the air in front of the cliff. In the end, its body touched the opposite cliff, and it crawled in again. It wasn't until the tail of the snow worm disappeared into the opposite cliff that Bai Zhao was relieved. This was a high-level snow worm. Even if she had the Nanping clock, she wouldn't be able to defeat it. Except during the monster tide, humans rarely saw such a high-level snow worm. Why did it appear here? Then there were many small sounds in the mountains. Even the howling cold wind couldn't drown them out. Bai Zhao used the Clearwater discernment to look around. She saw many black shadows in the wind and snow, rushing toward the north at a high speed, as if they were summoned by something. Chapter 191. Her judgment was correct. During the previous monster tides, there were many monsters of the snowy kingdom hiding in the depths of the snowfield and mountains, waiting for the next monster tide to launch a surprise attack on the human army. The question was, why did the snowy kingdom summon these monsters and abandon their original arrangement? What happened over there? If it was a human country, it might be because the emperor had died suddenly, and all the forces had to urgently mobilize all the troops back to the capital to fight for the throne. But the Snowy Kingdom didn't have such a problem, because there was no division of forces in the Snowy Kingdom, and there was only one queen. Suddenly, a beam of light appeared in the distance. Did the wind stop and the clouds disperse, and the morning sun appeared? Bai Zhao looked in that direction, but because it was too far away, he couldn't see it clearly even with the help of the Clearwater appraisal. "It's fog," said Jing Jiao. The world over there suddenly became bright, not because of the morning sun, but because the fog refracted the light. One could imagine how thick the fog was. That kind of cold fog could block the spiritual awareness and bring extremely low temperatures. What would the participants of the cultivation tournament do if they encountered it? What was more frightening was that the cold fog didn't come in one piece, but came in an overwhelming manner, like countless waves. It wouldn't disperse in a short time. Bai Zhao said, "Hurry up and send a warning. There should be enough time to retreat." She wasn't talking about herself and Jing Jiao, but the cultivators who would participate in the cultivation tournament. As she said this, she thought of her big brother who had already gone deep into the mountains, and she was a little worried. Jing Jiao's next words directly made her worry a reality. "It's too late. The fog underground will come faster. Baizeo followed his line of sight and found that the cliffs that had been covered by snow were blown out by the cold wind, revealing dozens of holes that had been covered for countless years, just like the hole that the high-level snow worm had just drilled into. A faint fog came out from those holes. She felt the coldness on her face, even from a distance of dozens of feet. She tightened the fire golden sparrow cloak, and her face was a little pale, both because of the cold and because of her mood. Jingjiu looked at her face and remembered that she was not like him. She could not endure the low temperature and cold wind on the peak for a long time. So he rode his sword down the peak. Baizeo's flying artifact was an extremely thin piece of green-colored glass. It looked very fragile, but its speed was very fast. The two of them did not speak and flew toward the source of the fog. The cold mist came faster than expected, and it didn't take long for their vision to be affected. Fortunately, the amount of cold fog coming out from the underground and the mountain cracks was limited, so it wouldn't affect Zhen Yuan's movement and divine sense, but it would make the surroundings even colder. Jingjiu asked, "Can you hold on?" Baizeo nodded. Her eyelashes, which were covered with frost, trembled slightly. She looked extremely delicate. Jingjiu reached out his hand and pulled her over, saying, "Sit down." Baizeo was a little surprised, but he quickly regained his composure. He withdrew the green glaze and sat on the sword as instructed. Jingjiu sat down as well, shielding his face from the incoming cold wind. Looking at his back, Baizeo said nothing. Jingjiu's stature was ordinary, but he looked a little tall in her eyes. "It's really big." "What?" "I mean, your flying sword can seat 2 people. Yes, I specially picked it." "You wanted to carry more people on your flying sword from the beginning?" "No, I thought it would be more convenient to sit or lie down." "That's a good reason." No one knew why Jingjiu chose this iron sword that he inherited from a mortal master Mo. Only Lu Shisui and Zhao Liu had a vague guess. Jingjiu continued to ride the sword forward. He could not exert his full speed because of the chaotic wind, but he did not have to worry about being attacked by the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom because of the cold fog. The fog became thicker, and the coldness intensified. Baizeo closed his eyes and activated the Zhen Yuan body fortification technique, saying nothing. After a long distance, the sound of a flying sword piercing through the air suddenly came from somewhere in the cold fog, followed by the sound of the sword hitting a hard object, followed by several screams. Eventually, all the sounds disappeared. It was dead silent in the cold fog. Jingjiu paid no attention to it, as if he did not hear it. Baizeo glanced at him. Jingjiu said, "I said it was dangerous ahead. Based on the distance and time, the sound should be from the contestants who requested to continue the cultivation tournament the day before yesterday." Baizeo uttered and said nothing more. Jingjiu glanced at her. The iron sword moved slightly and changed its direction. Soon, it came to the place where the sound came from. The cold fog was dispersed by the sword wind. They could vaguely see the scene below. Several corpses were lying on the snowy ground. Baizeo recognized that they were the cultivation practitioners who left the valley the day before yesterday. Among them were the 2 disciples of the Western Sea Sword School who made the most noise at that time. Jingjiu had driven away all the disciples of the Platonist sect, which indirectly led to the lack of protection for these groups. Otherwise, they should have been able to hold on for a longer time. Baizeo knew that it was not Jingjiu's fault, but thinking of the cause and effect, she couldn't help but feel a bit sentimental. The iron sword kept moving forward. The fog grew thicker. The most frightening thing was that the fog seemed to be even colder than the one they encountered that night, and it was more obstructive to their spiritual awareness. Baizeo was very worried. Under such circumstances, even she couldn't use her magic treasure, and it would be difficult for her to fly on the green glazed stone again. How could the other contestants retreat? What if they ran into those monsters of the Snowy Kingdom? Your judgment is correct. Those insects are in a hurry to retreat to the Snowy Kingdom. They won't attack unless they attack first. Jingjiu knew what she was thinking. Baizeo asked, "What if they run into them?" Jingjiu said, "Then they're unlucky." Baizeo said, "Even if they don't run into monsters, they can't hold on for too long in the cold fog. They don't have Jin Yuan and sword awareness as strong as you. Jing Jiu said, there are many idiots in the cultivation world, but there are also some smart people. Even if they don't believe me, they should be prepared. At that moment, the two of them sensed a strong breath. They turned around and looked in the direction of the southwest. Even though they were so far away and there was so much cold fog, they could still see clearly that a hole had been torn in the sky and innumerable beams of light were falling down. That hole was dozens of miles away from them. Such a momentum couldn't be achieved by ordinary magic treasures. Jing Jiu had excellent eyesight, so he saw clearly that the thing falling down from the sky and dispersing the cold fog was a green lotus, which should be the green lotus boat of the Kunlun sect. Then, in the sky above the mountains, several extremely strong breaths appeared one after another, emitting innumerable beams of light. The cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school, the lotus carriage of the Zen master, the straight line of water and sky of Ozawa, and even the sword boat of the Aoyama sect appeared again. The most precious treasures of the orthodox sects had all come here. The chi of heaven and earth was in chaos, and the cold fog was flowing everywhere. The vision became clearer. Many black dots left the mountains and were sucked into the sky by those beams of light. They should be the young cultivation practitioners who would participate in the cultivation tournament. The cold fog suddenly came out faster, and the mountains became even colder. The sects picked up their disciples even faster, trying to compete with the cold fog for time. Seeing this, Bai Zhao relaxed a little, and suddenly found the bamboo plate on her wrist was shining. It was a signal for help from her colleagues. She was startled and lost her composure. The coldness invaded her body, and her face turned pale. She took out a magic pill and swallowed it, coughing a few times in pain. Jing Jiu asked, "Are you sure you won't leave?" "I can't leave. You should leave quickly. I really can leave at any time." She was worried that Jing Jiu wouldn't believe her, so she said, "I have the seal of 10,000 miles with me." Chapter 192. Hearing this name, Jing Jiu was a bit surprised. In ancient times, the highest emperor had a national seal made of fine jade. Later, the national seal was lost, and by chance, it was found by the founder of Zhongzhou School. He split it into two with his supreme magic skill. After countless years on the Cloud Dream Mountain, he refined two magic weapons called the 10,000-mile seal. After the founder of Zhongzhou School ascended, the 10,000-mile seal was left on the Cloud Dream Mountain. It was said that it had the supreme magic power to travel through space. It was the highest magic weapon of the spiritual rank in Zhongzhou School, far more precious than the heavenly retrieval orb. Even though Bai Zhao was the most beloved daughter of the head couple of Zhongzhou School, it was still surprising that she had such a precious treasure with her. If other cultivators knew about this, they would probably try to kill her and steal the treasure in such an environment. But she told Jing Jiu about it. Jing Jiu asked, "Why didn't you leave?" "At first, I wanted to do what you did. If my fellow disciples of Zhongzhou School were in danger, I would help them and then leave." She said, "I didn't expect the situation to change so suddenly." There was another reason why she didn't leave. If they were in danger, she could help Jing Jiu leave. But at that moment, the bamboo talisman she carried with her lit up. That was the signal sent by the eldest brother. Lo Huainan was such a proud person, but she took the initiative to ask for help. She must be in a very dangerous situation at this time. Under such circumstances, how could she leave? "I see. Sit tight." As soon as he finished speaking, Jing Jiu rode the sword into the depths of the cold fog. Bai Zhao didn't expect his decision to be so sudden. She was a bit surprised and subconsciously reached out to grab his belt. The speed of the iron sword increased, and it instantly turned into a black line. The treasure lights in the sky were soon covered by the cold fog and could no longer be seen. The sun had risen, and the red and warm light shone on the lingering fog outside the fence. But the highest hall of the Nishiyama house could no longer be as peaceful as it was a few days ago. It was shrouded in a tense and depressing atmosphere. Whether it was the abbot of the Baodong Zen temple or the leader of the Kunlun sect, their faces were all gloomy. The 1,000-mile map in front of the sect masters and elders had already lost its effect. The cold mist that shrouded the mountains blocked their vision. A flying sedan landed outside the railing, and the chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau walked in with a grave expression, saying, "The preliminary count is done." The Duke of He suddenly raised his head and asked, "How much?" The commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau said, 43, and the number will probably increase. Hearing this, the room became deathly silent, and the atmosphere became even more oppressive. The cultivation tournament of the Plum meeting was indeed dangerous. But when had such a situation ever occurred? In just one morning, more than 40 contestants had died, just like that. Although the contestants were still very young and their realms were not high, they were all talented disciples who were focused on cultivating by their respective sections. It could be said that they were the future of the orthodox cultivation world. No matter how one looked at it, this kind of loss could be called tragic. Taking a deep breath, the Duke of He said, "Fortunately, Zen Master reminded us in time. Otherwise, more people would have died in this heavy fog." The abbot of the Baotong Zen temple asked in a low voice, "What is this fog? Why is it so eerie?" It said that the fog today is even colder than the last few days. That's right, and the fog is very thick today, showing no sign of dispersing. It's very difficult to find all the contestants. The chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau said, looking at the sect master of the Kunlun sect, Nan Wang, and the others. Duke of He asked, "Can we go further inside?" Before the sect master of the Kunlun sect, Nan Wang, and the others could respond, the chief commander shook his head and said, "The chaotic wind above the snowland is also affected by the strange fog and is more violent than usual. The magic boats of various sects can't hold on for a long time, not to mention going further inside." The warm red light shone on the sect masters and elders after passing through the railing and windows, but they couldn't feel any warmth, only coldness. The mountains tens of thousands of miles away must be many times colder. If they couldn't go further, what would happen to those young disciples who had already entered the depths of the mountains? Especially the group of Lo Huainan and Tong Lu. They had gone too far. The chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau lowered his head to take a look at the magic treasure and said to the crowd, "Master Duhai has already gone inside." Hearing this, the elder of the Zhongzhou school looked a bit better, thinking that the principal justice of the Guoqing Temple should be able to save a few people. Duke of He said, "The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church and the chief commander of the Northern Magic Army have received the order and are heading inside as well. We have to hurry up, otherwise I'm worried that they might be trapped inside as well." The sect master of the Kunlun sect said icily, "Don't think I'm exaggerating. Even the cold signal bird of our sect can't withstand the cold intent in the fog. How long can they hold on?" In the deep end of the mountains, the cold fog was extremely thick. The thick fog was extremely cold. Two powerful energies appeared, and the strong wind whipped up, bringing up the accumulated snow and pebbles on the ground, dispersing the thick fog to an area of 100 square feet. The chief commander of the Northern Magic Army and the sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church arrived together, exchanging a glance. These two swordsmen of the North had disliked each other for many years, but when they looked at each other that day, there was no hint of mockery in their eyes, only surprise. This patch of cold fog was truly eerie. Even they felt the Zhen Yuan in their bodies stagnated a bit. So how could those young disciples withstand it? They had no hope that the two groups led by Lo Huainan and Tong Lu would have any survivors. The cold fog in front of them suddenly changed shape. Monk Duhai walked out from the fog while carrying two people. They were Tong Lu and a companion of his. The companion was unconscious, but Tong Lu was still awake. He struggled and yelled, "Put me down! Put me down!" Monk Duhai loosened his grip, and Tong Lu fell onto the snowy ground. He got up with great difficulty and dashed toward the fog unsteadily. "Ha!" The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church slapped him to the ground and shouted in a deep voice, "It's extremely cold over there. We can't stay for too long." Do you want to die? Lo Huainan is still in there. Tong Lu struggled to stand up and said in a trembling voice, I want to save him. I want to save him. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church and the chief commander of the Northern Magic Army exchanged a glance, feeling puzzled. The relationship between the Zhongzhou School and the Western Sea Sword School was improving, but it was definitely not close. Moreover, the competition between Lo Huainan and Tong Lu in the cultivation tournament was extremely fierce, and it was for this reason that their group had to go deep into the north of the mountains. Why did Tong Lu act as if he and Lo Huainan were sworn friends? He was in danger because he wanted to save me. How could I leave him alone? Tong Lu slapped his own face like a madman. I want to save my face. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church frowned slightly and knocked him out. He looked at Monk Duhai and asked, Master, what's the situation over there? Monk Duhai's eyebrows were covered with frost, and he said in distress, The extreme cold is only one aspect. There's something else going on. I feel restless with every step I take. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church and the chief commander of the Northern Magic Army looked at each other again, thinking in shock that even the principal justice of the Guoqing Temple couldn't maintain the Zen heart. It seems that we can't save Lo Huainan. Let's go. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church said with a grave expression. The chief commander of the Northern Magic Army said, Wait a minute. They're still by Zhao. Monk Duhai sighed and said, And Jingjiao. Before entering the cold fog, they had all received requests that they couldn't refuse. The chief commander of the Northern Magic Army was an official of the imperial court, so he was close to the Zhongzhou school. Monk Duhai was even asked by the Zen master to take care of Jingjiao. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church looked at the chief commander of the Northern Magic Army and asked, Did the Zhongzhou school say that Bai Zhao has brought a locating magic device? I didn't find it. It must be too far away, said the chief commander of the Northern Magic Army. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church found it troublesome, saying it was the disciple of Aoyama named Jingjiao who first discovered the problem. Why did they go inside? Nobody knew the answer. The cold fog gradually gathered again, and a breath was faintly discernible in the depths of the fog. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church's expression changed abruptly, saying, We can't stay here any longer. Monk Duhai sighed again while looking at the cold fog. The prayer beads in his hand emitted a glow, illuminating the way ahead. The sect master of the Windy Broadsword Church and the chief commander of the Northern Magic Army picked up Tong Lu and the other young disciple who had fainted, respectively. They used their magic treasures to break through the cold fog and return to the cloud ship of the Zhongzhou school. The elder of the Zhongzhou school found that Lo Huainan and Bai Zhao didn't come back with them, and his face looked terrible. But he knew that the situation was tense, so he didn't say anything. He ordered the cloud ship to break through the chaotic wind and fly toward the south. Monk Duhai and the elder of the Zhongzhou school exchanged a few words in a low voice and walked back to the railing of the cloud ship, looking down at the snowland and mountains below. There was no sound, nothing at all. The mountains had disappeared, leaving only the boundless cold fog. It was a clean expanse of whiteness. Tong Lu woke up and looked up at the clouds above. The clouds were stirred up by the violent, chaotic wind, changing into countless shapes, but nothing could change the expression in his eyes. His severely frostbitten fingers should be in extreme pain and itching at the moment, but nothing could change the expression in his eyes. There was no spirit in his eyes, as he recalled the scenes of that moment in a daze. The terrifying snow worm, the tragic death of his companions, his own despair, and the appearance of the tall figure of Lo Huainan. In the end, the tall figure disappeared in the mouth of the worm, which looked like a black hole. You must survive. Tong Lu's face was pale, and he said to himself, Otherwise, what's the point of me winning against you like this? It was unclear whether he was so focused on the cultivation tournament that he didn't pay attention to the outside world, or he was too frightened to realize that the first place in the cultivation tournament this year was Jingjiao. Monk Duhai glanced at him, and he had the same doubts as the sect master of the windy broadsword. Chapter 193. There was still the snowland beyond the mountains, but it was not the one in the south. The fog here was much thinner, not because it had dispersed, but because most of it had been blown into the mountains. The temperature here was even lower than in the mountains, as if even the sound could be frozen. It was deathly silent. A black iron sword was flying soundlessly over the deathly silent snowland, like a boat, ready to sail across the lifeless and cold world. The iron sword was very wide. Jingzhou sat in front of it, and Bai Zhao sat behind him. Both the cloud boat of Zhongzhou School and the swordsmen of the human race had been left far behind and could no longer be seen. In such an environment, the regular cultivation practitioners Zhen Yuan would be slowed down, and their spiritual awareness would be obstructed. It would be difficult for them to even ride the sword, and they would be frozen to death in a short time. For some reason, Jingzhou didn't seem to be affected by the cold. He sat cross-legged at the head of the sword, his eyes closed, and the forefinger of his right hand pointed forward. A faint but extremely pure sword energy came out from his fingertip. It formed a semicircle shield, enveloping Jingzhou and Bai Zhao in the middle as it was blown by the cold wind. Bai Zhao was wrapped tightly in the cloak of the fire-golden sparrow, exposing only her eyes. Looking at the figure in front of her, she blinked her eyelashes, but the frost on them didn't fall off. The confusion in her eyes grew stronger. In such a cold world, even the elders of her sect wouldn't be able to withstand it for long. Jingzhou was merely in the initial state of the undefeated. How could he bring her here? What was he doing with that finger of his? Was it some kind of sword style? How could it withstand the attack of the cold? If it weren't for the heat emitted from that finger, she would have died a long time ago, and had no choice but to use the seal of 10,000 miles to leave. Bai Zhao wasn't wrong. The finger of Jingzhou was indeed a sword style. If the elders of the Green Mountains saw this scene, they would definitely let out a cry of surprise. He was able to employ the six-dragon sword style of Shuriwei Peak to such an extent. Compared to this finger, the fire dragons employed by Gu Qing and Shui Yong by the stream of sword washing were nothing. The iron sword slowly came to a stop. There was no sound in the surroundings, not even the sound of the wind. More than 10 miles away, there was a faint cold fog rising. Or was it a cloud? There were no living creatures on the ground. To be precise, there were no living creatures. The frozen corpses of the snow-foot monsters could be seen clearly. Those snow-foot beasts were either six-legged or five-legged. They were relatively low-level, but the Snow Country's monsters had actually been frozen to death. This was something unimaginable, and one could imagine how terrifying the cold fog was. Looking at the other side, Bai Zhao wondered if her big brother could hold on for much longer. Is he still alive? Jingzhou asked. Bai Zhao looked at the glowing bamboo tablet and said in a trembling voice, "He's still alive." Jingzhou asked, "Do you have a good relationship?" "Yes." Bai Zhao paused and continued, "Senior brother and I are like brother and sister." Thinking of the one in the Guochang temple, Jingzhou said after a moment of silence, "Then I have a good reason to come." Bai Zhao said seriously, "This is the business of our Zhongzhou school and has nothing to do with Aoyama. Why do you have to take the risk with me? It's too dangerous here. You'd better go back as soon as possible." "It doesn't matter. It's on the way anyway." Jingzhou was very sensitive to the changes of the heavenly secrets. He didn't need to calculate to know that this trip was not too dangerous for him, but it was not the case for the girl behind him. He said, "I suggest you use the seal of 10,000 miles to leave right now." Bai Zhao naturally didn't believe what he said. Who would put himself in such a dangerous situation just because it was on the way? She reached out her hand to hold the two slightly hard objects, thinking that if they were really in danger, she would give one of them to save his life no matter what. "How far is it?" Jingzhou asked. Bai Zhao said, "It's just ahead of us, about 13 miles away." Jingzhou gazed at the place in front of him, not knowing whether it was a cloud or a fog. Bai Zhao was a little puzzled. She didn't know how Jingzhou did it, but she knew he could ride the sword easily in the fog at a high speed. He was calm and composed all the way, without any fear. Why was he hesitating when he was so close to finding his big brother? Jingjiu said, "That's the real border of the snowy country. Even those in the heavenly arrival state won't go there easily." Bai Zhao was a little startled. It wasn't until then that he realized they had come to such a distant place. The snowy country was certainly the most dreadful place for human cultivation practitioners, far above the underworld. Moreover, the current situation was so weird. They still didn't know what that extremely cold fog was. Besides, his big brother's original location wasn't here. How could he come to such a distant place? Jingjiu just gave an explanation, not intending to stop there. The iron sword kept flying forward. Soon, it had crossed the distance of 13 miles and arrived in front of the cloud and fog. The snowland sank abruptly here, forming an almost straight precipice. The cloud and fog were lingering in it. It was hard to see how deep it was. If it weren't so cold, the scene would be very beautiful. There were some vague movements in the stone wall covered by the cloud and fog. Bai Zhao reached out his hand and pointed in a certain direction. Jingjiu stood up and stepped on the sword to descend. The cloud and fog dispersed to both sides. The scene on the stone wall became clearer. There were bare stones everywhere. There wasn't even a piece of snow left. Occasionally, one could see the skin shed by the snow worms and the limbs and bones of the snowfoot beast that hadn't been digested by the snow worms. The iron sword flew toward a hole in the stone wall. The bamboo plate was getting brighter and brighter. It seemed that the magic treasure of the Zhongzhou school hadn't made a mistake. Lo Huainan should be in there, but it was unknown how he had survived. A gust of wind suddenly rose under the stone wall. Innumerable cold fog, together with crushed snow, spurted out from the innumerable holes in the stone wall. The cloud and fog, which had been as quiet as a painting, moved at an unimaginable speed. They were instantly torn into innumerable pieces, blocking the sunlight and darkening the surroundings. White lights could be seen faintly in the holes that spurted cold fog. They should be the eyes of the snowworms. It was a terrifying scene. The iron sword rose and fell in the violent wind and snow. Bai Zhao's face was pale. He grabbed Jingjiu's belt tightly to prevent himself from falling off the sword. Jingjiu acted as if he didn't see these scenes. He calmly and attentively controlled the sword, breaking through the attack of the wind and snow and slowly approaching the hole. Suddenly, he grunted and dispersed the sword technique in his right hand. The cold suddenly invaded. Bai Zhao's body instantly stiffened, and he couldn't hold on to Jingjiu's belt. Jingjiu suddenly turned his head and looked at a distant place in the depths of the wind and snow. An extremely bright sword light flashed in his eyes. A moment ago, an extremely powerful thought swept across this stone wall from a distance of more than 10,000 miles and just brushed past his body. At that moment, even his Tao heart was slightly scattered. He felt an unprecedented threat. The owner of that thought was the strongest opponent he had ever met in his previous life. Without hesitation, he vibrated the sword pill and released his sword essence. But he immediately knew that there was a problem with his response. His consciousness and sword heart were the same as in his previous life, but his cultivation was still very low. Compared to the existence more than 10,000 miles away, he was like an ant. He shouldn't resist. He believed that the other would not be too interested in an ant. But since he had released that sword essence, the other would definitely attach great importance to him. This was not narcissism, but because he believed that the other would be able to recognize him. As expected, an unimaginable pressure came from the far north. Even though the pressure was hundreds of thousands of miles away, it landed on him with incomparable accuracy and without any deviation. Jingjiu shook the sword bracelet in his left hand and wrapped around Bai Zhao's body. He threw him into the hole in the stone wall and then fell off the sword. Chapter 194. Bai Zhao fell on the snow at the entrance of the cave. The sword rope then fell and returned to its original sword shape, which was as red as blood. Ignoring the cold, she climbed to the edge of the cliff and looked down. She saw the wind and snow raging, and Jingjiu had disappeared in the center of the dark whirlpool. A touch of determination appeared in her eyes. She took an elixir and summoned the Nanping Bell with her spiritual awareness. She turned around and walked into the cave, picking up the sword in the snow. The Nanping Bell illuminated the way ahead, and the wind blew off the frost on the cave walls. She didn't go far before she saw a snow worm. The snow worm was about 15 feet thick, and it was a terrifying existence of the high rank. But now it was dead, without any signs of life. Baizeo walked to the snow worm, looked through its translucent skin, and saw Lo Huainan. Lo Huainan was in the belly of the snow worm. His face was pale, and his upper body was naked. His eyes were closed, and he was soaked in the sticky juice of the snow worm. The green bamboo token tied to the little finger of his right hand was shining, but it was a little dim, as if it could be extinguished at any time. He must have been swallowed by this high-ranked snow worm in the previous fierce battle, and at the same time he fought back and injured it. The snow worms had passed through the slippery cave and brought him to this cold world. After coming here, the snow worm couldn't hold on any longer and died quietly. Lo Huainan was seriously injured and couldn't come out. She could only rely on her strong cultivation to support herself in the worm's belly. Fortunately, he was soaked in the sticky juice of the snow worm's belly, or he would have been frozen to death. Baizeo took another elixir, and the Nanping Bell blasted at the snow worm. With a loud bang, the gravel in the cave flew like arrows, and the ground shook for a long time before it calmed down. But the skin of the snow worm only caved in slightly, and a few white streams appeared, but there was no sign of it breaking. If Baizeo continued to bombard it with the Nanping clock, she believed that the dead snow worm would not be able to hold on for too long. However, she did not know how long Lo Huainan could hold on. More importantly, she didn't know how much longer she could resist the cold. Her gaze fell on the sword in her hand. The sword was as red as blood. If her guess was correct, this should be the thoughtless sword. Without hesitation, Baizeo raised his sword and stabbed at the snow worm. With a soft sound, the blade of the sword broke through the incomparably hard skin of the snow worm, and half of it went in. The cold wind whistled in from outside the cave. The Nanping Bell flew up against the wind and hit the wall of the cave. Rocks and soil fell down and blocked half of the entrance of the cave, slowing down the invasion of the chill. Baizeo silently activated the hidden scripture that he had yet to fully master. Ignoring the danger of his Taoist heart collapsing, he resisted the chill and poured all of his Zhen Yuan into the sword in his hand. With a swish, the hard skin of the snow worm was cut open by the blade of the sword, and its body fluid gushed out like a waterfall. The body fluid of the snow worm was extremely sticky, like honey. It fell on her body with great force and speed. Baizeo could no longer stand and was washed down by the sticky fluid. Lo Huainan's body fell to the ground with the sticky fluid. Her face was pale, and she was no longer breathing. Baizeo helped him sit up and put her hands on his back. She began to pour Jin Yuan into his body. Time passed slowly. Fortunately, most of her and Lo Huainan's bodies were wrapped in the snow worm's fluid, so the chill that came with the wind did not stop the circulation of Jin Yuan. After a long time, Lo Huainan spat out a mixture of blood and worm fluid and opened her eyes wearily. Sensing the vibration from her palm, Baizeo let out a faint smile on her face, but was a bit nonchalant, just like her voice. "Are you all right?" Lo Huainan looked very weak. She said in a low voice, "I need to rest for a while before I can leave." Baizeo said, "This is the northernmost area. Once we enter the snowy country, it will be difficult for us to leave." She did not know that when she heard this, Lo Huainan's eyes showed a hint of pain and struggle. "Junior sister, Master should have given you the seal of 10,000 miles, right?" Baizeo was silent. She was thinking about how to persuade her senior brother to leave with the seal of 10,000 miles and let her stay. She wanted to stay and wait for Jingjiu. Because of her silence, The pain in Lo Huainan's eyes became more and more intense. Senior brother, we have one more person. Bai Zhao did not finish his words. Lo Huainan said in a weak voice, yes, there are two of us, but there is only one seal of 10,000 miles. Of course, it is not enough. Bai Zhao was slightly stunned, thinking that this was not what he wanted to express. Suddenly, there was an extremely warm breath in the cold cave. This breath came from Lo Huainan's body. He had been swallowed by the snow worm for a long time. During this time, he had been silently operating the Chaoyuan skill of Zhongzhou school. Although he was weak after being seriously injured, he had accumulated enough energy. It was enough for him to launch a sneak attack. A muffled sound rang out. Lo Huainan's body retreated as fast as lightning. Her solid and broad back bumped into Bai Zhao. Bai Zhao did not expect this and was directly knocked into the cold stone wall by this force, spitting out a mouthful of blood. The Namping bell made a clear sound and automatically protected its master. A dark small bell broke through the juice of the snow worm and rushed toward the Namping bell. With a loud bang, the stone wall of the cave collapsed again, blocking the cold wind even more tightly. It was dark in the cave, with only some faint light. Two small bells fell in the snow, emitting a faint light. The dark small bell was the North Time bell. Bai Zhao leaned against the stone wall. The front of his white robe was full of blood spots, like plum blossoms. She was in a trance, wondering if senior brother had lost his mind. Otherwise, why would he attack her? What Lo Huainan said next made her feel extremely cold, colder than the wall she was leaning against, colder than the wind and snow outside the cave. I'm senior brother. Since there's only one seal of 10,000 miles, let me use it first. Under the faint light, Lo Huainan's pale face looked like a ghost, and the apology in her eyes looked so fake. Junior sister, you stay here. I will tell master and masteress where you are when I get out, so that they can come and save you. Bai Zhao looked at him blankly with a pale face. Lo Huainan was her senior brother. He watched her grow up, and they were very familiar with each other. But at this moment, this face was unimaginably strange. She closed her eyes and then opened them again. It was the same amiable face and the same sincere eyes, but why did it look so ugly? In terms of closeness, Lo Huainan should be the closest person to her in the world. She regarded him as her family, and to some extent, he was even closer to her than her parents. This was known by the entire Cloud Dream Mountain. Many people believed that if there were no accidents, they would become cultivation partners blessed by the entire cultivation world. In fact, if it were not for Bai Zhao's own reluctance, she might have married him by now. Faced with such a sinister betrayal and such a strong mental shock, some people might cry out loud, and some might curse. But Bai Zhao smiled. Her smile was a bit faint and bitter, thinking that this trip to the cultivation tournament was so absurd. Lo Huainan attacked her sneakily because he wanted to get the seal of 10,000 miles from her and leave alive. Chapter 195. Of course, Bai Zhao wouldn't believe what Lo Huainan had just said. If he could get out of here alive, he would probably make up a particularly beautiful story that would move anyone who heard it and make them shed tears like rain. But he would never tell anyone where he was. He would hope that he would die here, unable to tell anyone this secret. Oh no, perhaps after he had recovered some of his power, he would personally kill her before he left. Having thought this, she calmed down, but she felt very apologetic toward Jingjiu, who had accompanied her here. Seeing her expression, Lo Huainan knew what she was thinking. No matter what you think, you are my most beloved junior sister, she said. I won't kill you. Is that so? Bai Zhao asked with a smile. Perhaps provoked by the mockery in her smile, Lo Huainan's expression turned cold. Perhaps I can't be considered a pure good person, but I really do adhere to the path of Xinxia. When Tong Lu was in danger, it was I who saved him. Otherwise, how could I have fallen into such a dangerous situation? Junior sister, you really have to believe me. Bai Zhao looked at her in silence. Lo Huainan gradually fell silent. She took out an elixir and swallowed it, beginning to regulate her breathing and dissolve its power. Baizeo asked, "In a long life of cultivation from now on, can you convince yourself?" For a cultivation sect of the orthodox path like Zhongzhou school, it was very important for one's Tao heart not to be swayed. Perhaps everything I've said is true, that I have the courage and will to sacrifice for the orthodox path, and I've already proved this point, but looking at the corpse of the snow worm, Lo Huainan said after a moment of silence, "I didn't expect that after being swallowed by this snow worm, I didn't die immediately, and that it actually brought me here. Death was right in front of me, but it refused to show its true face. The process was so long, and I don't want to experience that again. A long life of cultivation? No, after this experience, I don't think there's anything longer than this." Baizeo said, "So your courage and willpower have been worn down." Lo Huainan looked at her and said seriously, "Yes, I don't want to die. I still have a lot of things to do, a lot of scenery to see." In the belly of the snow worm, I swore to myself that if I could survive, I would live at all costs. "I believe what you said," said Baizeo. "It's because I received your distress signal a bit late." For Lo Huainan, getting her approval seemed to be a very important thing, and her expression became a little more relaxed. "Junior sister, I am very grateful that you came to save me, but I know that if there is only one choice in the end, you will definitely not sacrifice yourself to let me live. So you decided to snatch the 10,000-mile seal from me." Baizeo looked at him and said, "If we don't talk about you and me, do you think you're worthy of my parents?" After a moment of silence, Lo Huainan said, "Master and Masteress have been very kind to me, right? Then why did you bring a magic treasure like the 10,000-mile seal with you when you participated in the cultivation tournament? While I have participated in so many cultivation tournaments, but I have never taken one. If the cultivation tournament is a test of life and death, why can you stay out of it? Why should I be the one to die? After all, there's a difference between those who are close to me and those who are distant. They treated me coldly, so don't blame me for being cruel." Baizeo was very angry and said, "Don't you feel guilty saying such things?" Lo Huainan said with an indifferent expression, "Master and Masteress have fought for a lifetime until we are in this generation. Master wants me to marry you, and Masteress wants Tong Yin to marry you. To be able to marry a woman like you, no matter how you look at it, is the best thing. Then do you know why Tong Yin and I didn't agree immediately? Because we all know that Master and Masteress just want to find a cultivation partner for you, a sickly person, to help you make up for the inborn debt. No matter how hard Tong Yin and I cultivate, it is just a wedding gown for you." Hearing this, Baizeo was a little startled. She really didn't know about this. Tong Yin is the smartest guy in the world. How could he not see it? So he thought of a very clever way, which is to use me as an excuse. Lo Huainan smiled bitterly and said, "He retreated so quickly. So where could I retreat to? I had to make a great wish that after I reached the cultivation state, I would come to the snowland to watch the night for the human race and become the second broadsword saint. Who would be willing to stay in the snowland for hundreds of years like that idiot? It was just a choice I had to make to avoid this marriage. I want to see how Tong Yin could retreat, but I didn't expect this matter to bring me a lot of fame." Baizeo was silent and didn't say anything. "But it's good now. I probably don't have to come to the north anymore." Lo Huainan didn't finish her words. If Baizeo died here, he naturally didn't have to come to the snowland to avoid this marriage and imitate the broadsword saint. "What about the great wish you once made? The whole cultivation world knows about it. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at?" Baizeo said, looking into his eyes. Lo Huainan said, "Time can make people forget all their promises, and what is said to others is not important, just like what you once said to me, Tong Yin and Nan Shan. The future of the human race, the threat of the snowy kingdom, the peace of the underworld, the conservatism of the elders, these are just the imagination of a little girl. Do you really think I believe what you said and am willing to help you lead the younger generation of cultivation practitioners to accomplish the great cause that all the predecessors couldn't accomplish?" "So what you said before was all false." "Of course it was false. I'll just play with you for a while because you like me and respect me. Just like when we played house when we were young. Lo Huainan said after a moment of silence. I was much older than you. At that time, it was Tong Yin who played with you most of the time. Bai Zhao raised his head proudly like a princess and said, I did respect you before, but you are wrong about one thing. I have never liked you. Lo Huainan smiled and didn't say anything. Just like the big brother on the Cloud Dream Mountain, who looked at his little sister who lied out of anger with a doting expression. Bai Zhao continued, the one I like is Jing Jiao. Even big brother Tong Yin is much better than you. I know you are not happy at this time, but you don't have to make yourself suffer. Lo Huainan raised her eyebrows slightly and said, that disciple of Oyama, named Jing Jiao, is nothing. What makes him qualified for you to use as an excuse? Bai Zhao said with a smile, I am telling the truth. It is because you're really not good-looking. Lo Huainan was the strongest of the young generation in the orthodox cultivation world. He was tall, majestic, and had an extraordinary temperament. But his appearance was not good-looking. He was just ordinary. Tong Yin was born with a childish face and eyes as white as snow, far better than him. Not to mention Jing Jiao. Little sister, you are really amazing. Lo Huainan forcibly suppressed the anger in her heart and said indifferently, under such circumstances, you can still easily irritate me. I am not lying. Jing Jiao and I are really in love. Otherwise, how could I come to the cold north by myself? He did not hesitate to consume Zhen Yuan and destroyed several magic weapons of Aoyama to send me here. As she spoke, Bai Zhao's face was full of tenderness. It was very real and definitely not fake, because that was what she thought in her heart. Lo Huainan was startled and said with a slightly cold expression, Is that so? Then where is he? Bai Zhao said, We encountered a snow worm. It was not convenient for him to bring me to fight, so he sent me into the cave first and then went to fight with the snow worm. I think he will be there in a moment. If she did not say this, Lo Huainan might have believed her a little, but now she judged that she was lying and said, In that case, I have to hurry. Having said this, he closed his eyes and began to adjust his breath. Bai Zhao also closed his eyes. She did not intend to use Jing Jiao to scare him. She just wanted to plant a trace of doubt in his Taoist heart, and at the same time, not to let him pay too much attention to her. Lo Huainan must have suffered a great injury in the belly of the snow worm. She used Jin Yuan for a long time in the sneak attack. If she wanted to recover to the state where she could use the seal of 10,000 miles, it would take some time. Moreover, he did not know that she had mastered the hidden scroll. In this case, she might really recover faster. The chills seeped through the collapsed stones and came to the cave. The Namping bell and the North Time bell lay on the ground in silence. Time passed slowly. Her eyelashes blinked and frost fell. Lo Huainan opened her eyes, stood up, and walked to Bai Zhao. I did not expect that you have mastered the hidden scroll. Bai Zhao opened his eyes. He looked a little tired, as if he had given up. Among the 17 mysteries of Zhongzhou School, the hidden scroll was a higher-level Jindan method than the Chaoyuan formula. It was extremely difficult to practice, even more difficult than the escape method of heaven and earth. Lo Huainan said, Sister, I don't want to humiliate you. Hand it over yourself. They were both disciples of Zhongzhou School. Even if Bai Zhao would rather die than hand over the seal of 10,000 miles, he still had a way to break her instrument, and it would be very cruel. Bai Zhao took out the seal of 10,000 miles and threw it to her. She did not expect that Lo Huainan had also mastered the hidden scroll, but she still did not give up hope. She did not reveal anything when she spoke before. Sure enough, Lo Huainan did not leave immediately. He flicked his sleeves and walked to the entrance of the cave. He looked out of the cliff. He thought that Bai Zhao was lying. But what if what she said was true? If the disciple of Aoyama named Jing Jiao was really here, and if he could leave alive, what would he do? Looking at Lo Huainan's back, Bai Zhao's eyes turned cold. He was ready to mobilize the Zhen Yuan accumulated by the hidden scroll to launch the final attack. She did not think that she could defeat Lo Huainan. She only hoped to use the method of mutual destruction to bring her into the terrible snowstorm outside the cliff. All of a sudden, Luo Huainan uttered a faint ah, seeming to be surprised. Bai Zhao thought of a possibility. He became nervous and could not attack anymore. A figure appeared on the cliff, climbing up slowly in the snowstorm. The snowstorm was like a knife, and the temperature was unimaginably low. The cliff was polished until it was smoother than ice. But the person's hand was still tightly attached to the cliff and was not taken away by the great force of the snowstorm. As if he had sensed something, he lifted his head and looked up, staring at Luo Huainan quietly. Chapter 196. I'm sorry, Luo Huainan said. The bell of the north time broke through the wind and snow like a stream of light. Jingjiu looked at Luo Huainan in silence. Such a sudden attack, such a sinister method, did not cause any change in his expression. His eyes were calm, without anger or despair, just a little tired. The stream of light fell in the wind and snow. There was a loud bang. The stone wall cracked. Seeing that the bell of the north time was completely hit and Jingjiu fell into the snowstorm again, with no chance of survival, Luo Huainan turned around and walked into the cave. After staying outside the cave for a short time, his eyebrows were frozen. The movement of Zhen Yuan also became a little sluggish. He knew that he could not stay any longer. Sister, I had a fortuitous encounter in this cultivation tournament, so I really don't want to die. Thank you for saving me. I will definitely have a good future. After saying this to Bai Zhao, Luo Huainan activated the seal of 10,000 miles and left. She spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood on her white robe had just coagulated, and many more blood spots appeared. Just like the plum trees in the Nishiyama house, many new plum trees had been painted by the painters. Bai Zhao's Taoist heart was in a mess, and the Zhen Yuan that she had gathered with the hidden scripture dispersed. She walked to the entrance of the cave with difficulty and looked at the wind and snow under the cliff. 2 lines of tears silently flowed down her cheeks, which instantly froze. What you need to do now is to rest, not cry. A voice came from the bottom of the cliff. There was no emotion in the voice, as if it was colder than the wind and snow. But to Bai Zhao, the voice was so warm. Jingjiu reached out and picked her up like a child, walked into the cave, and stuffed her into the snow worm's body roughly. There was still a lot of sticky juice left in the snow worm, which wrapped her body and could prevent the cold from invading. His right hand brushed across the hard stone wall. Countless stones fell down like rain and jumped up, once again blocking the entrance of the cave. It was so tight that not even a trace of cold wind could seep in. Unlike Zhao Liu, Bai Zhao cared a lot about cleanliness. If she was soaked in the corpse fluid of the snow worms, she would feel disgusted even if she knew the reason. But at this moment, she didn't feel that way at all, because she only had eyes for Jingjiu. Her line of sight followed Jingjiu, unwilling to move away for even a moment, as if she was in a daze. Jingjiu took out a pill and handed it to her. The pill was dark red in color and had an ordinary appearance. It had a unique spicy smell of mugwort. This was the Xian Chao pill. Back in Nanhezu's precious treehouse, Jingjiu had taken one out. This kind of pill contained an extremely strong fire nature, which could even dispel the coldness of the netherworld. It had a strong effect in refining and nourishing the golden elixir, so it was very precious. The most important thing was that the Xian Chao pill was produced in Zhongzhou's Xianhua Mountain. Bai Zhao was a disciple of Zhongzhou's school, so the magic skill she cultivated was perfectly compatible with it. If it was in the past, Bai Zhao would have wondered why Jingjiu, a disciple of Aoyama, had her own pill. At least, she would have been curious. But at this time, she didn't ask anything. She directly opened her mouth and swallowed the Xian Chao pill. Bai Zhao's lips touched the tip of his finger. She was certain that he was alive, and that he wasn't a figment of her imagination. She finally felt relieved, and as soon as her spiritual awareness relaxed, she fell asleep. Her veil had fallen off during the battle, revealing her beautiful face. In her sleep, she looked even more delicate. Jingjiu looked at her with his sword discernment and saw a bright line appearing on the girl's neck. The Xianqiao pill had melted and was melting into her body. He was a little tired, so he sat down cross-legged and began to regulate his breath. It was too cold here. The chill penetrated into his bones. Even his Zhen Yuan was a little stagnant. Fortunately, his body was very special, so he didn't have to worry about being frozen to death. The main reason was that the consciousness that was more than 10,000 miles away had consumed too much of his Zhen Yuan and spirit. After being swallowed by the whirlpool of wind and snow, he didn't dare to ride his sword because he was afraid of alarming that distant existence again. He could only climb up the cliff with his bare hands. Because of the same reason, when Lo Huainan attacked him with the North Time Bell, he didn't fight back. He took it head-on, loosened his hands, and fell into the whirlpool of wind and snow again. Of course, it was very dangerous. If it were any other cultivator, they would definitely die. He fell down twice and climbed up twice. It was easy to get tired of it. He had lived twice and had to walk the same path of cultivation twice. It was really a little annoying. The tiredness also came from the matter itself. He didn't know why Lo Huainan attacked him, nor did he ask by Zhao, but with a little deduction, he could roughly guess the story. The human heart was sinister and selfish. There were too many such stories in the world. As long as you lived long enough, you would encounter them sooner or later. Anything would naturally become boring, tiring, and annoying if it was repeated too many times. So all those years, he only cultivated in Shinma Peak and never met outsiders. After a long time, he finished regulating his breathing and opened his eyes. He used his sword discernment to check himself and confirmed that the sword pill was undamaged. The Dao tree was the same as before, but the speed of Zhen Yuan was 70% slower than usual. Bai Zhao also opened her eyes and woke up. The Xianqiao pill's medicinal power had all entered her body, making her feel better. But this could only guarantee her temporary safety and couldn't help her resist the bitter cold for a long time. The mucus in the snowworm's corpse would also be used up one day. What was more troublesome was that there were two extremely deep cracks on her Jindan, and it could shatter at any time. Lo Huainan was really ruthless. Bai Zhao was silent. Forming the Jindan was the most difficult stage of cultivation in Zhongzhou school, similar to the birth of the sword pill in the sword sect of Aoyama. Once the Jindan was broken, it would be very difficult to form it again by cultivating again. Even if she was the only daughter of the sect master of Zhongzhou State and had countless herbs and elixirs to build her foundation, or could form the Jindan twice, it was almost impossible for her to have the same grade as before. In other words, she seemed to be able to see the end of her cultivation path. There was no wind in the cave, but the chill still passed through the stones and fell on her body. She was congenitally deficient, and now she was seriously injured. Invaded by the chill, her face became even paler. "I'm sorry to implicate you," Bai Zhao said softly, "but I think, since you can bring me here, you should also have a way to leave." "I'm not sure. The chill of heaven and earth is stronger than before, and the Zhen Yuan is not running smoothly." Jing Jiu said, "The connection between me and the flying sword may be cut off at any time." He didn't know when, but the iron sword had returned to his side and was held in his arms. He noticed that Bai Zhao didn't look good, so he had an idea. A sword flame emerged from the iron sword, illuminating the cave. It looked like a torch. The iron sword was burning in his arms, and the scene looked a little magical. The fire looked a little warm, but compared with the invasion of the cold outside, it was still too weak. The surface of the snow on the cave wall had just melted, but quickly turned into solid ice. Looking at his pale face reflected on the ice, Bai Zhao made up his mind. "I can let you leave. Lo Huainan thinks I only have one seal of 10,000 miles, but I actually have another one." That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.